Hi, this is Spider-Man, and I'd love to stick around and listen to amazing spider talk, but Madam Web just told me Doc Ock is about to kidnap Mary Jane Watson, and well, a spider's gotta do what a spider's gotta do.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. Be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk. The amazing spider talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider talk.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavazdan, and I'm the founder and editor of AmazingSpiderTalk.com.
And I'm mischievous Marc, founder of the Chasing Amazing blog and author of 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die.
The very book where we got our nicknames of Dapper and Mischievous.
Who could have thought of it, Dan?
It's awesome. And that's just one of the wonderful memories of the past 100 episodes, because thank you, everybody, for joining us for Marc, I can't believe I'm saying this, our 200th episode anniversary spectacular of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans, or really a whole bunch of fans, and a whole bunch of collectors, and a whole bunch of creators, as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
Dan, I mean, 200 episodes, more than 5 years in the making. You know, I somehow go back to a conversation you and I had back in the day. Where do you see us in 5 years? And I famously said, 5 years? Something must have horribly gone wrong. And I think it has, because here we are, Dan, 200 episodes. Huzzah! Amazing Spider Talk is here. We got so much to cover in this celebratory episode of the show. First, we're going to start off with a conversation you and I recorded at Terrificon in front of a small audience, conveniently located at the Racetrack Bar in the Mohegan Sun Casino. I'm sure the people at the sports book really appreciated all our chit-chat about Spider-Man while they were trying to gamble on horses.
Well, everybody thought that we were a sports podcast, so they must not have heard super clearly.
That's great. Let's not talk about what we saw in the bathroom that night, Dan.
The less said about that, the better.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, you know, the less we say about that, the better, of course. But what we do want to talk about is what we said in that conversation, which is where we shared our thoughts of the show and what has happened in the past 100 episodes. And then we even get a brief appearance from the Ultimate Spin's own Brian Jacob. If you like navel-gazing, people, you gotta check this out.
Yeah, then we'll be going straight to our interviews with all kinds of Spider-Man creators that we got to meet at Terrificon, including Nick Spencer, Christopher Priest, Bob McLeod, Barry Kitson, Paul Soules, and Marc Guggenheim. So hang around past the navel-gazing for some actual amazing interviews with a bunch of creators.
Yes, Dan. And then once we're done with those creators, we'll be turning it back to you, the listeners of the show, and we'll be playing your voice messages you left us in the celebration of our 200th episode. It's a ton of content, definitely worth listening all the way through. You never know who might show up. I mean, seriously, Dan, you just have no idea who might show up. I think even you were surprised by one of our guests.
You will know when I just shut up and don't have anything to say, because I'm so surprised. But before we get to all that, it's especially important for me to emphasize just how much this episode wouldn't be possible without support from our wonderful Patreon subscribers. Literally, the only reason Marc and I were able to meet up and fly across the country to get these interviews was because of all of your generosity. We just can't thank you enough. Marc and I, we communicate over the internet, but being in person together is a really rare instance for us. The last time was at my wedding, so this was a really special treat that allowed us to hang out together, and there's just no amount of, dollar sign you can put on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it really does kind of give a true demonstration of the power of you have as listeners to, give us the resources we need to deliver the best content we possibly can. It's truly a wonderful gift that you guys give us each and every month through Patreon, and we cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, so if you want to help us out as well, and you're listening to this, if you enjoy the show and you want us to help continue doing amazing things like this, like flying across the country and meeting up together to record interviews, maybe something less specific than that, you can get amazing bonus content as well and additional episodes that are never released publicly. Please check out our show notes and check out our Patreon page and consider joining the team.
Yeah, Dan, and for this episode specifically, we wanted to send a special thank you to a couple of our patrons who joined us at Terrificon. Those two, of course, were Chris Dunn and Jason Carriere, who was rocking the Chasing Amazing shirt, I must add, at Terrificon. Seeing that in the flesh, I think I know who my favorite contributor to our show is, Dan.
You can buy Marc's affection. But it was really neat to meet them in person. So thank you, Chris and Jason. I don't have any words for what it means to meet people that listen to the show and would spend their time hanging out with us. So enough of that navel gazing. Let's get to some more navel gazing action with our conversation about our feelings upon reaching episode 200.
All right, Dan. Well, we are here at Mohegan Sun. It's the end of the second day of Terrificon. It's been a heck of a day, a heck of a last 24 hours or so for you and I since we arrived here, talking to creators, meeting with fans and collaborators on our great podcast. So we are at 200 episodes, Dan, so let's get navel-gazy.
It's going to be super navel-gazy. So if this is your first time listening to the podcast, this is not how we normally do things, but it's going to be a peek behind the curtain of the kind of like personal stuff that goes on behind the scenes of Amazing Spider Talk. 200 episodes. Is this the one where you and I get together and murder a burglar?
Yes, all in the pursuit of silverfish and buried treasure.
That sounds good to me, Marc. And Mohegan Sun is the perfect place to do that.
Yes.
It's kind of the basement of Connecticut, as we've learned in our time here.
Yeah, I wonder which slot machine has silverfish underneath it.
Probably too many of them. But the question is, only one has a burglar.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah. This is a weird way to start this 200th episode. But again, if it's your first time, you may want to skip to the interviews at the end.
Yes, exactly, of which there are many. Well, anyway, Dan, when we met for 100, first of all, it's worth noting that we've been doing this for 5 years now, and when you and I first started this show, you were kind of like talking about in 5 years, and I think my response to you was, if we're still doing this in 5 years, something went horribly wrong.
well, Marc, did something go horribly wrong?
Let's just get through this episode, okay?
No, I think it's worth saying, and Marc and I have already spent a number of days together already this weekend, and we infrequently see each other. What is this, like the fifth time we've hung out, maybe? Probably, yeah. Something like that. I mean, other than every Sunday night meeting on Skype and
right.
being disembodied voices, in a box. Although we recently started doing video chat, so that's been a big upgrade.
Yeah, I can finally see when I say something so ridiculous that you just completely roll over from it. So
yeah, well, back to my main point is really and we'll get into how this has manifested itself, but the best thing about the show is that I know that I made a really good friend out of the show, and there's been teary moments all weekend, and we're a couple beers deep, so that might continue tonight. But we love Spider-Man, but really this has become less about that and more about our relationship in a way. And this will be an episode all about that, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Dan, I think one of the first things we should do is, obviously getting to 100 episodes was an accomplishment. 200, I guess, is 2 times that accomplishment. I feel like I'm getting a little Trumpian in my hyperbole here.
Do we just pat ourselves on the back several times?
I think so. But let's also talk about what's changed for us personally over the last 100 episodes, because there's been a lot of big life changes for us, right? I mean, most notably with you, you're no longer Dan the Bachelor, so that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much we've talked about this, but like when the show has started, I've known you, Marc, longer than I've known my wife.
Right.
Which is crazy to think about. Sometimes I feel like I talk to you more than I talk to my wife.
I mean, I've known my wife longer than you, but that still might hold true for me, which is kind of odd, but that's okay.
When I first met my wife, I remember it was like maybe 9 months into the show, and then like a year into the show, I was like, oh, we're going to L.A. My wife and I from Maryland, we're going to L.A. because we might move to L.A. together, and we had known each other for 3 months, and you probably thought I was a psycho.
Yeah, I was a little concerned about what was going on in your life, but I said nothing because I trusted in you, Dan, because how could someone who be so right about Spider-Man be so wrong about what they're doing with their romantic life?
But at the same time, she's a redhead, so I think you and I share that at least.
Well, yeah, but when it comes to love, that's all we share, okay?
But yeah, I got married a little over a year ago, and one of the coolest things about the wedding is that this guy who I'd met 3 times and talked to over the internet was suddenly in my wedding.
That's true. I don't know who that guy was. No. Yeah, he had me reading something by Stephen Tobolowsky.
Of course I did.
Because that's what you do. And I got to meet your family, and I'd met Amy a couple times before then, which was nice.
That's my wife, for those who haven't listened to the episode where our wives appeared.
Exactly. So, and you got to, you had met my son a couple times as well, but I guess,
I'll never forget the first time I ever met your son. His way of approaching me was kissing me directly on the lips. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do. Not much has changed in that regard. So, yeah, no, but it was obviously good to be able to share that moment with you guys and to be there for you. And hey, I got to see Annapolis, Maryland, which I had never been to, despite only living like 4 hours from it. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. So.
It was really fun, and having you in the wedding was a really great honor.
I went to your comic book store, and like they knew who you were in there, and they were like, and I was like, yeah, well, I'm the one who did. And they didn't have my book had just come out at that point, and they did not have my book in stock. Which
here's the embarrassing thing about this, Marc. That wasn't even my comic book store.
Oh, okay.
That's another comic book store that plays our podcast over the speakers in the store. In Annapolis, Maryland. That's just weird.
Right.
You yourself, this is weird to say on our show because obviously we're people of many hobbies.
Right.
But you have become, in the past few years, very passionate about another hobby, which I feel a little bit like, like I've been cheated on in some regard. Tell us a little bit about that. People might not even know, although anybody that follows you on Twitter is bound to know about some of your extraneous interests.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dan, probably a little after our 100th episode, I kind of had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment about my health and my wellness, and I started to eat better, but I also started exercising more, including I started to run. And I had run in high school through cross country and track and stuff like that, but I was way out of shape but needed to kind of do something to get a little semblance of balance back in my life. And originally it was just something to get healthy. And I started doing it more and more. And then, some personal stuff in my life happened that kind of necessitated me having more of an outlet for both stress and just physical exertion and things like that. And the just going out for a run here and there became me becoming a marathoner. And I ran my first marathon last year, and I ran a second one in this past May, and I'm running my third one in this October. And, I know that that's sometimes been a challenge for us, and so one of the reasons why I would even think of bringing it up in this episode, because it was kind of like this new thing. We already have these busy lives. We have wives. I have a child. We have families and jobs and things like that. I mean, this is a hobby, as you mentioned. So to kind of bring that balance in, I've always appreciated how you've kind of just rolled with it to some degree. I mean, even
of course,
even on this trip, it's like, well, I got to get my run in the morning, and you're like, well, when are we going to record our episode, Marc? But it's just worth noting because I feel like it has impacted the show to a degree, but we've kind of done a good job, at least you've done a good job in managing me and being a good sport about it and not letting it affect us to a negative degree, I think. So
we don't often talk about the schedule, and I think, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I don't think about, like, who is actually producing these things. You and I record on Sunday nights, and now we release on Wednesdays. But it used to be, before our show changed, that we would record on Thursday nights, and it would be out on Friday morning, which meant that I would edit the entire show for anywhere up to 5 hours or more the night after. And we already have the struggle that you're in New York and I'm in LA, and the first 100 episodes for, I don't know, maybe like the first 50 episodes or so, we were in the same time zone. And having even just 3 hours apart makes things, increasingly difficult.
Right. Well, we've kind of developed the science to it now, and but again, like I felt like I needed to kind of mention that, not because I'm, want to brag about it or anything like that, but I feel like, it just kind of demonstrates how much of a chemistry and a connection you and I have in terms of doing this, that we can kind of, really blow something up. I mean, I'm running, there's some weeks I'm running 50, 60 miles a week, which is a lot of time to be.
It's really inspirational, guys. I mean, just the weight loss on its own.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, but so that's certainly one of the big changes. And then, I think it's worth talking about you professionally. I mean, you've kind of gone through a couple of iterations over the last 100 episodes. I mean, I know you're in a really good place now, and not that you weren't in a good place earlier, but like you kind of got to see a side of things that I think added some new insights to our show, and would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into my psychology, but I'll say that, like, there were a number of years there that got pretty dark for me in regards to employment. I think I probably mentioned it on the show that, like, I was pretty much unemployed for 2 years, but with brief stints in the comics industry as I tried to kind of take what we were doing here and try to find a bit of a career around it. And I worked at CBR for a little while as an assistant editor. And I also worked as an editor for a comic book company called Emmett Comics, which is now defunct, but it was an incredible experience to really learn about, like, how comics were made, to edit my own comics and kind of understand all different aspects of the industry. And I feel like I've kind of brought that back to the show in a way. I know that it has really made me appreciative of deadlines and things that, like, we would probably be, like, overly harsh and critical on. Like, seeing it from a different perspective really kind of changed the way that I approach comics. And I've always felt like you and I were very fair and good at verbalizing our critique, but something about working in comics, and I'm still working in comics in a way, in that I'm writing a book myself, although a lot of people are writing books that aren't published yet. But I don't think I could ever go back to looking at comics the same way I did before. But it also has kind of opened up a lot of opportunities for, like, relationships with creators that weren't there before. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those as we go later into the episode. But that was a big change for me. I'm back to teaching now, but it's been a really holistic kind of thing for me to go through all of this.
Well, like I said, Dan, it was good to kind of get those insights out of the show. I mean, personally speaking, as much as I love comics, I've never had much of an interest of working in the industry, probably for some of the reasons that you've experienced yourself about working in the industry. But at the same token, I came into this situation with a background in journalism and editing and whatnot. So, I've always kind of felt like I've at least brought that insight to it. But again, like, trying to, as we've found this weekend, like, doing journalism in a newspaper setting or a magazine setting is different than trying to do comic book journalism. I don't even know if comic book journalism truly exists in a way that, it's a very weird hodgepodge. I mean, I think, maybe the closest is stuff like what we're doing in this episode and in some of our other interviews, where it's just trying about having conversations and exploring ideas. But, like, in terms of news, it's basically just kind of regurgitating.
We tried on SuperiorSpiderTalk.com for a while.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
That's been a big change, shutting that down to some regard.
Absolutely. But, I mean, kind of talking more broadly than the personal lens, Dan, I think the other thing to note over the last 100 episodes is just how much, not to toot our own horn, but I feel like the show has really taken off in a significant way, and there are a number of factors that have contributed to it. Some of which are things that are, might be a little too in the weeds, even for a 200th episode that we should be talking about. But
you guys all like hearing about algorithms,
yeah,
right?
exactly, and search and what do you call it, SEO and everything. It's led to some really crazy experiences. Just only a month or two ago, Dan, and who knows, there's a good chance that this person is listening to this episode, but I came home from work at the same time that my upstairs neighbor did, a gentleman who had moved into my two-floor apartment building.
And this is describing it in a strange way. It's literally there's two places to live in your apartment. It's not like there's two whole floors.
Yeah, no, it's a Brooklyn row house, so it's first floor, second floor, and so this gentleman is getting home at the same time I am, and we were just kind of exchanging pleasantries, and he then says to me, "Oh, I liked your show." And I kind of looked confused because this is not something that I typically have said to me in any capacity. And as after a little bit of kind of, what are you talking about from me, discovered that he was a fan of our show and must have caught my name from the mail or something like that and put two and two together. And it just so happens that this gentleman who moved in about a year ago is a Spider-Man fan and a listener of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, and I think that's just the craziest thing in the world today.
I still can't get over that. I think that's so strange. The world should not be that small. I mean, although I'm guessing, there are people listening to this that we've never talked to, and listeners that don't reach out to us, and we might be surprised by exactly who is listening. I was at a convention myself, walking around, and I wasn't really talking to anyone, and I just so happened to lean over and recommend a book to someone in the shop, saying "Oh, you should check out this book." Not even a Spider-Man book. I was saying, "You should check out this book," and a guy on the other side of the store turned over and he was like, I'm sure he's listening right now. He turned over and was like, "Are you Dan from the Amazing Spider Talk?" It was the first sentence I said, and he just recognized my voice. And to me, that's so bizarre because I don't think that I'm anyone. But, to someone out there, they listen to me talk.
Yeah.
Just the idea that people listen to me talk is still somewhat foreign to me.
Yeah, not only do they listen to you, Dan, but they actively seek out you talking, which, I don't even know if I can claim that.
Tell that to my students.
Exactly. But, I kind of had similar experience. At this point, especially, I go into my comic book shop now, and, they know me as the guy with the Spider-Man podcast and the show. It probably also helps that all the books I pull are Spider-Man family books.
They're something's up with this guy.
Yeah, exactly. But, we it becomes a point of interest. There, a couple of them are big Ron Friends fans, and I was able to show them the Ron Friends commission before it dropped because I had a copy of it on my phone, which they were totally oohing and eyeing about. So stuff like that is a lot of fun. The other big thing, of course, happened for us recently. Well, last couple of years was right before, what was it, for the Marvel anniversary or something, where we got polled by a Hollywood Reporter about the top Marvel stories of all time, which I just thought was weird that we were all of a sudden being looked at as authorities on the topic of Marvel Comics.
The best thing was the quote from the editor was, "We reached out to Stan Lee and couldn't get him, so you guys were the next best thing." And it was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and of course that also led to you. You've been doing stuff for Hollywood Reporter that's not even Spider-Man related. That's been awesome. And
I'm always the enterpriser, so I reached out and have made it a kind of part of my career is writing for the Hollywood Reporter now.
Yeah, and just these little things. They've benefited us in a number of ways. I feel like, doing the show for 5 years, having 200 episodes under our belt, there are just little things in terms of even how we communicate with writers and artists and other creators now. We experienced that certainly over the last 48 hours here in Connecticut in terms of talking to certain people like Marc Guggenheim and Ron Friends. There's a familiarity now in terms of dealing with them. When I have a question about something when doing research for our show and it kind of crosses paths with the Jerry Conway era, I could just shoot Jerry Conway a note now and I can get a response within the day. And it's not me. I'm not trying to humble brag here. I'm just saying it's just demonstrating where we're at with the show now, and I think it's really awesome that like we're just kind of, it's whenever people from outside ask me what it is we do, and they maybe ask questions, well, how big is it or how popular you are, I'm like, look, it's a niche community. But within this niche community, I feel like we have very firm roots like planted in now, and like we're part of it in a really interesting way, and in a way I never imagined. That hence the if I'm doing this in 5 years comment, because in my mind I'm thinking we'll be broadcasting to 20 people or something, and that'll be that, which is I think unfortunately where a lot of podcasts go.
What's been funny for me is the kind of change in perspective that you and I have had regarding the creators. Not that we aren't still like reverential to them, but they become people for us instead of myth. And I think it's kind of changed the attitude of the show too. Like we're treating these people, we're still fans, but we're not like oohing and eyeing over them. I don't think we ever did that to any kind of dangerous degree. We've always been somewhat professional. But like I remember the first time we had Jerry on the show, that's a big deal. But you and I were like besides ourselves, like losing. I can't believe we're going to talk to Jerry Conway. And I still can't believe that we're talking to Jerry Conway and that he knows our names and like that people talk to him and he mentions us or whatever. But like he's become a person to us. Like Jerry's a friend of mine. Like you said, you can email him. I see him at conventions, and he's like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" Ron Friends heckles us when we see him. So
they know us. I mean,
right. And that's a very specific story that may have happened today. But I mean, that's been really interesting, and I think like whether we can be aware of it in the moment or not, it has changed the quality of the show. Like we can talk about Dicko, and we'll talk about this later, but we can talk about Dicko as a man instead of a myth.
Yeah.
Because even though we didn't know Dicko, like we've kind of had this appreciation for creators for their faults, their human attributes that I'm sure we were aware of, but couldn't really appreciate back in the day.
Absolutely. And of course, like, through this success, it's allowed us to do some really cool things that have really engaged our community. I mean, there's the Spider Slack, which I wish I did contribute to more, but I recognize how awesome it is and just what a great community it is. And of course, our Patreon page, Dan, which I really think has been a game changer for us in terms of how not only we provide resources for the show, but I feel like, again, it's adding to the community factor of our show.
Well, I mean, people don't know it right now. We are sitting with two of our longest standing Patreon members sitting across from us drinking beers. And all of this is only allowed because the Patreon exists. I couldn't have flown out here, and we couldn't have had the hotel without the support of all of our patrons. So we don't just say thank you, for the patronage. Like we're using it to make a better show, and that's been huge for us because we did not have those resources, especially when I was unemployed. The Patreon was like just allowing me to pay to keep the hosting fees of the site up, and now it's really become this whole thing where we can get commissions and we can fly around the country doing recordings, and that to me is awesome. I actually get to see you in person.
Yes.
Very crazy.
And let me be clear here as you get deeper into this episode, folks, that no, you're not just, giving Dan a plane ticket so we can hang out and talk face to face. I mean, we got some really cool content at this convention, and I think it was, again, it was only possible because of your support and the resources that it provided for us. So, it's you give to us, and, we would hope in return that you're going to get some really cool content, and that will, I don't want to say make you want to give more, but at least, demonstrate to you that the support means something.
Yeah, we don't take it for granted. It's an essential part of the show. One thing I wanted to talk about in regards to money maybe is that, a big part of our show at the beginning was our collecting of comics. Like we really made key to talk about like your chasing amazing element, your site and memories of books when we bought them. But you and I have now been finished with our quest to collect all of the Amazing Spider-Man comics for quite a while now, to the point that I imagine there's a lot of new listeners who don't even know that was like a part of our show, that like you and I have complete collections of Amazing Spider-Man, even if we both fight over the annuals. And I guess that's the first thing to really kind of address is, you finally finished your collection within the past 100 episodes of the show.
Yeah, that's very true, Dan, and it's complete for real now because we had that one. Was that a Patreon only episode? I'm trying to remember if that made it into the mainstream or not.
It was a Patreon only episode
where I was crowing about. I think it was, I forget which annual it was, but I got one of the annuals, and like without really talking to me about it first, you said, "Well, what about the Planet of the Symbiotes mini special? Do you have that one?" And I did, and I
don't think I said it even that way. I said that was the hardest one for me to find,
and I just kind of froze on, and like I'm not, peeling in the effort of peeling back the curtain, Dan. I was pretty pissed off at you for that.
You can hear it,
because I was like, "What the bleep are you talking about here?" That was not what, I came on here to be like, I finally did this, so you can stop haranguing me. I don't know if he wants to be put on the spot right now, but I finally did get the Planet of the Symbiotes issue, Dan, courtesy of one of our listeners and patrons. Dan, I know that it really must just eat at your soul that you really can't hold that over my head anymore.
How do I communicate teeth grinding over a microphone? Just when I heard that, like, no, that's okay, because you harangued me about the Ends of the Earth one-shot, and thankfully our good friend Zeke Ward, who's not with us right now, mailed that to me first. So, you know what? This is a healing moment, Mark. I think our long battle has ended until I decide to arbitrarily shift the goalpost yet again.
I mean, maybe we can fight over the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine, Treasury magazines. Oh, wait, we can't because we both got those this weekend, right?
We did. So we are still collecting things, even if we don't really necessarily talk about it. It's funny because the collecting is kind of what brought us together, but it's not really like the core of the show anymore.
No, it's not. But like I was actually telling one of our patrons who's here with us this weekend the story of first meeting Tom DeFalco back at the Connecticut Comic-Con 5 years ago. And as you're setting, Tom was kind of giving us a hard time, which we later learned was just his sense of humor. But at the time, we were kind of like getting a little nervous and put off by it. And as you were like trying to set up the microphones and stuff like that, and you were basically telling me to, tell them about our show, tell them about our collections, try and like, humanize things so like this isn't a freaked out experience. And so we're both collectors. We're both chasing complete runs of Amazing Spider-Man. And he was like, "Oh, well, which issue? How many issues do you have left?" And at that point, I had like 4. And he was like, "Oh, so you have Amazing Fantasy 15?" I'm like, "No." And he's like, "What do you mean you don't have Amazing? Well, how can you be collecting Spider-Man if you don't have Amazing Fantasy 15?" And then I was like, "Well, I don't have all the annuals yet either." And he's like, "Well, what the hell are you talking about? You don't have 4 issues left. You have like 20 issues left."
And I was like, "Yes, Tom, you truly are legendary."
Exactly. So, but yes, at that point, certainly the collecting element was still a very essential part of our show, to the point that that's how we promoted ourselves, even to creators that we were talking to. But I kind of like where we're at now, where it's just more, it's back to being just a plain old hobby again,
Yeah, well, it's funny because the new heart of the show actually like came out of nowhere, which was, I think, your book really kind of helped us shift things in a different direction, and this was totally unexpected. You weren't like shopping a book around or anything.
No, I mean, when I had started Chasing Amazing, which predates, that's the blog that I started writing about my chase to collect all the issues of Amazing Spider-Man, for those who have not been indoctrinated. At that point, I think like the blog to book thing was like a bit of a thing in terms of, the zeitgeist, but I never really saw the potential of that happening. And then a couple of years ago, in 2016, I got approached by Triumph Publishing saying, we've read your blog, we listened to your podcasts, we're looking, they wanted to get something out before Spider-Man Homecoming. Of course, there's a great episode that you interviewing me that explains all this that I'm sure we can reference here, but, the short version is, they wanted a Spider-Man book that kind of went through the history of the character and some background and some unknown facts and trivia and things like that. And, again, the foundation was through the show that got us there. But then I feel in having that book, it kind of lent some authority to both of us as a place to go for Spider-Man talk. And I think I was able to mention the podcast in the book, so hopefully that helped bring more people in. But I just think in general, it just added another layer of polish to what we're doing, that just anything that kind of just adds legitimacy, because I mean I hate to be this way, but this is an industry that I feel like legitimacy is hard to come by, and this was something that just gave us that in a different way, and put us on a map, even though I don't think the book has sold as well as I wish it had, but it doesn't matter, like I still have people who tweet at us that they have the book, they want an autograph, they want a book plate, whatever, and I always appreciate the support. I'm the first person to plug the book every chance I can, so buy the book.
But even more than that, the book has kind of provided a spine for the new show. I think, like, after the book, it was kind of like, you know what? I think the show needs to change. For a while, like I said, like we were recording on Thursday nights after a new comic would come out on Wednesday. So we'd have to get the comic, write a review for SuperiorSpiderTalk.com, write up all of our show notes, and process like what we were doing in 24 hours by our own kind of self-mandated desire to get stuff out. And then I would edit it Thursday night and release it for Friday morning, and it was kind of just insane. And after years of doing that, 4 years of doing that, it was kind of like time to abandon our symbiotic, if you will, relationship to Marvel's often bizarre and random publishing schedule.
Yeah, I think the first thing I said to you when you proposed maybe changing things up is I will do anything that will no longer make us slaves to the publishing schedule, and I think even putting that aside, I love the new format of the show. I think this is like allowing us to get into this topic in a way that when we started we didn't think. I don't even know if we thought not that it wasn't possible, but we just kind of were like, well, we'll talk about Spider-Man stuff, and maybe we'll do some interviews, and maybe we'll talk about some classic issues. And I think that just the focus that it's provided us, and it's just allowed us, I think, to really shine in terms of how we format our show and how we solicit our show and really bring in new listeners. I mean, it's much more streamlined, and I think it makes us more listenable, for either first-timers or even long-timers who may not be reading the new stuff or anything. It's really broadened our audience, and that's been probably more than anything else the biggest shift that has come over the last 100 episodes.
Because really, like at its essence, when we started the show, we were just two blokes that didn't know each other, because I was bugging you for a little while to do a show, but we didn't have any kind of like credentials or connections or anything. Like, you were doing this blog and had some readers, and that was a good springboard for us. But we, people might listen to us now and think, oh, these guys are very connected and very much a part of the comics industry, but really we're just two guys that know each other from now living on other sides of the country. And I don't think we could have done the show that we're doing now when we first started, nor would we have thought to, because the idea was just like, oh, there's a new comic coming out and let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And now, like, we've done the 160 plus episodes that led up to this format change, and I think only now could we be doing the high level of content creation that we're doing. At least I think it's high level, with the creators that we're having come and talk on the show. I mean, and I think it's awesome. And in a way, it's like some weird kismet. Like, everything came together to make this happen. The book was kind of the spark of the whole thing.
Yeah, whether it's Ron Friends to come on to talk about the influences of Steve Ditko, or Marc, I mean, very recent episode, but Marc Waid talking about Peter's parents and the influences there, and how that kind of fed into what he did later on. I mean, that, to me, that was one of my favorite interviews we've ever done, and we didn't really ask Marc Waid anything about his career for the most part. I mean, we talked about the family business issue that or graphic novel that he worked on, but not so much like about process, or it was just kind of like as a springboard to talk about this historic topic about Peter Parker's parents. And like, again, yeah, it's just a thing about the legitimacy issue that I was talking about. I mean, like, we can do that now because I feel like, not because we're bigger or better or anything like that, but I feel like we have more confidence in ourselves. We have more confidence in the show that allows us to, like, hey, let's bring in an Eisner Award-winning writer to talk about Peter Parker's parents.
Yeah, I mean, we always open the show with the same thesis, for the show. And even though our show has completely changed, I feel like the thesis still applies. We're two fans and collectors looking at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture. And by bringing on these creators, we're allowing them to also be fans. Like Marc Waid's response was backed by his experience, but also allowed him to express his fandom for the character in a bit of a bigger picture. And I don't think that that's changed no matter the format of the show.
Absolutely.
One of the things that has changed about the format of the show, or maybe not the format, is bringing guests on the show in terms of people who aren't industry professionals. I think a lot of our listeners may also have listened to The Ultimate Spin over the years with Brian Jacob, and he kind of became like not a main fixture on our show, but like a constant friend of the show. And that was a huge kind of change for us in reasons we'll detail. And actually, Brian came and joined us here at Terrificon, and we sat down for lunch with him and talked to him about his own experiences with our show and our experiences with having him on it. So let's go to that conversation. Hey everybody, it's Dan here. We're not quite at Terrificon. We're sitting in a bar/restaurant having lunch at Terrificon, and I'm joined by Marc. Hi, Marc.
Hey, Dan. How are you?
And we've also got Brian Jacob here. Hi, Brian.
Hey, guys.
You might remember Brian from, several of our episodes, including the Marvel Retailer Summit episode, where I think we dubbed that one the Grumpy Old Men episode.
That's right.
Brian obviously hosts The Ultimate Spin and is a good friend of ours, and we wanted to have him on this show for the 200th episode because, Brian, not only being a longtime friend of ours and host of a sister podcast of ours, he's been, in the past 100 episodes, become a small part of the show, being on several episodes. Remember that Iron Man Miles Morales crossover that we did. Oy vey, indeed. But, Brian, we wanted to have you on for any recollections and memories you have of, your experience with our show, maybe the past 100 episodes, and we'll just talk about our kind of shared memories as friends.
Sure.
Yeah, Dan, if I can interject for a second, just not to reveal too much about the sausage-making process here, but as Dan probably is thinking to himself, I've, for the longest time, always been a little hesitant about bringing more voices onto our program when it wasn't a creator. And I think I can safely say that, when we started having Brian on to occasionally guest on some Miles books, and then, of course, the Grumpy Old Man Summit, like that, Brian, like just your general knowledge and intellect and also your chemistry with us, for what it's worth, really kind of relaxed me to that idea. So, that's why I think it's important to have you on for this show for a milestone episode like this, because, it was kind of a breakthrough for me on a personal level. And since, I make everything about me at the end of the day, as Dan can relate, I just wanted to thank you for that, and just for being able to jump in when you did, and obviously all the great work you did on Ultimate Spin. So that was pretty awesome stuff.
Thanks, Marc. I really appreciate it. And yeah, and for what it's worth, it's mutual. I mean, I was very aware of the chemistry and rapport that you and Dan have built up, and so when you guys invited me to be a guest on it, I was very nervous about it as well. So working both ways. Thanks for making me feel right at home, really. So I've enjoyed every time I've gotten to hang out with you guys on the show and in person.
So, being on the show, I guess this is a bit of a naval-gazing episode because it is, the 200th episode. I'm sure there's some listeners at home that were like, I'd love to be on an episode of Amazing Spider Talk because we all love Spider-Man so much, or I love talking to Spider-Man and I don't have anyone to do it with. What has that experience been like, I guess, for you coming as an outsider?
That is exactly what it was. I love Spider-Man, and I didn't have anyone to talk about it with. And so I've been a comic book fan for longer than I haven't been. So I was really, I was reading Spidey in the 80s, and I drifted away from comics in general for a while, and then started to have kids. I wonder what's going on with Spider-Man right now. And at the time, it was Superior Spider-Man. So I walk into a comic shop for the first time. I grab it like, what is going on? This is amazing. This is crazy. And I was completely oblivious to all the drama that was going on in the real world surrounding this storyline and all of that. And so it's like, I needed to talk about this with someone. And the way it was pitched at the time, it's like my younger kids weren't really going to be reading it, so I was looking for some kind of conversation. Didn't have anyone in my social circle that was into comics, so I started looking for podcasts and went through a few. And then I landed on this thing called Superior Spider Talk, and it was perfect. And I didn't know you guys at all, but throwing you on my phone for the morning and listening on my headphones as I was commuting into work, it was like I had known you guys for years. It was such a great, natural, comfortable rapport. I love the approach of your show because it's like how I like to talk about comics and stuff. Like I like to dig deep into the ideas, and I don't have a lot of patience for, oh, this sucks, it was crappy, goodbye. But if like I didn't like it and here's why, that was a revelation to me. So yeah, listening really into it, started writing in, and I think my favorite memory of reacting strongly to the show was I was commuting into work, coming in from Jersey to Manhattan. You go through Penn Station, train arrives, and slowly make your way out of these subterranean tunnels up to the surface, and it's just jammed with people. And as I'm listening to Dan and Marc talking, and I know I'm learning about these guys through the show, and I learned that Marc has been collecting the entire run of Amazing Spider-Man. And he just casually slips that he didn't know what a no prize was. And I've known I knew that since I was a kid, because I would go through the letter section and, the editorial team was always awarding those out. And here was this guy who was like immersed in it way more than I ever was, enough to do a podcast about it, actually go back and track down all these issues. And he didn't know. To me, that was like Marvel 101. And I actually yelled, what? Like at the top of my lungs, in the middle of this crowd, first thing in the morning, got way too many uncomfortable stares. And yeah.
You can imagine my surprise.
I would,
as someone who does the commute, not in from Jersey, but on the subway through, in New York City every day, all I can say to that is I'm so glad that I contributed to an uncomfortable New York City commute moment. It's an honor, Brian, truly is.
And then shortly thereafter, you became part of the team just by writing in saying you wanted to join. You were one of our first collaborators on the website.
Yeah, which I loved.
The now defunct website. And sooner or later, you were doing the ultimate spin and podcasting. And, I'm sure that was a pretty amazing experience for you. I mean, I have to say, I'm a big fan of yours, in the opposite direction. Your interviews are... we do a lot of interviews, but I'm eminently jealous of your interviews.
I'm sincerely humbled and flattered, and we've said it many times on our show, and I don't think you can say it enough. Ultimate Spin owes everything that it was and became to Superior Spider Talk and Amazing Spider Talk. You guys set an incredible bar, and that's what we were hoping to do as we were looking at a different corner of the web and talking about Miles and eventually Gwen. And the Spider Friends interviews that you guys have done really, I think, inspired the approach that we decided to take when we were actually connecting with creators and they were willing to talk with us. It was like, all right, what would Marc and Dan do? How would they approach it? And so that really informed what we did. So thank you guys.
On a more personal note, I got married last year, and I came up to New York to do a bachelor party, and of course, I had to have you, Brian, and you, Marc, at my bachelor party. And at this point in the episode, I'm not sure if we've already talked about this or not, but I think this is a great time to relive the dorkiness of that night.
A true sausage party in every sense of the word.
It was. We did eat sausage and pretzels at a German beer hall where they were many attractive women, but no, we were talking about Spider-Man comics for hours on end with our friend Alan Scherstl, And, nothing quite like having your friends show up to your bachelor party with comics as a gift. So thank you, Brian. And Mark, do you want to say what you brought?
Well, yeah, I brought the infamous wheat cakes recipe from Kurt Busiek's Untold Tales of Spider-Man Annual #1. I just felt it was appropriate. And did you guys ever actually eat the wheat cakes?
I did.
I did too.
They were pretty good, I thought. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they were like old wheat cakes.
Yeah.
But, nothing more appropriate for a bachelor party than comics and wheat cakes. I think Peter Parker wouldn't have it any other way.
Absolutely.
What more is there to say?
And now we are all just sitting at a table, beet red, in another bar, talking about one other time we were at a bar together.
Well, Brian, I just wanted to thank you for first of all, to coming up here to Terrificon to join us and being such a big part of the history of our show. And I know that you will be a big part of our show moving forward. At least I hope so. Here's to the ultimate spin and our ongoing friendship.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys. And I'm so glad that we found each other through this show and through this series and character. And yeah, here's to what's coming up next. As Scott Lang would say, thanks for thinking of me.
Here's to the grumpy old man.
Yes. Yes. Going in style. Well, Dan, it's always great when someone like Brian comes on, and one of his memories of the show, of course, is basically me being a complete idiot about the fact that I didn't know what a no prize was. So beyond just that, why don't let's.
We're like 150 episodes removed from that moment.
That's true, but why don't we look at the last 100 episodes and talk some more about some of our more specific memories and related to our own content? Like, hey, we're getting naval-gazier, Dan. Are you ready?
We love our own content.
Oh, my goodness. So one of the first things that always comes to mind was in the lead up. Well, no, probably about a year out from your wedding, we had at that time, your fiance, my wife, on the show for the first time for a Spider-Man Blue discussion. I really pushed to do this episode because I'm thinking to myself, Spider-Man Blue, it's such like a great, book for people who don't really read Spider-Man comics because it's like kind of its own evergreen quality. I think you even described it as like, oh, this is the kind of comic I'd buy my mother or something. I think that was your description of it.
Although it also ends with someone in negligee.
That's
so
true.
I'm not necessarily sure about that.
Well, fair. But the fact of the matter is, we're like, oh, this is a great discussion. So for Valentine's Day, this very loving story about how Peter and, the flashback to Peter and Gwen Stacy and their relationship and their romance. And we got to have both of our dearly beloveds on with us. And yet that conversation didn't go quite as great as we hoped it would.
Well, one of our fears was that we would be dominating that conversation, but it became very clear very quickly that we were not going to get a word in edgewise, which was actually quite interesting because they really seemed to not like the story, although I think your wife gave it a little more credit than mine did.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even so much about like or dislike, but I think, certainly maybe the more polite way to say it was they found it problematic.
Yes.
And in a way that I never really looked at that comic before. So, I guess that's, in terms of providing new insights and whatnot to the story, that was an interesting experience for certain. And then we had him on a year later in the build-up to your own wedding to talk about the wedding annual, Amazing Spider-Man number 21. Now that one, I don't think we had expectations of them liking, but that was a lot of fun having them, especially in light of your wedding coming up in a couple of months.
Yeah, that was really great. And another one I wanted to talk about from our Essential series, because both of those were part of our Essential series, which we closed out, was that we talked about kind of Mary Jane's origin story with our now friend Alan Scherstl, which listeners might not remember that one episode with Alan Scherstl, who's the film editor for The Village Voice, but Alan has kind of quickly become a good friend of ours through the show. The funny story about how I met Alan is that I was at UCLA getting my master's degree, and I was writing a paper about this movie called Sorcerer, which had been kind of rediscovered. It was a William Friedkin movie that came out after The Exorcist, and I loved this movie, and it was being kind of revalued, in the 2010s or whatever. And Alan was the first one to really kind of like break that bubble on how great this movie was. So I was writing a paper about it, and I sent this guy I didn't even know an email saying, I'd love to interview you about your review process for reevaluating this film. And the email I got back was one line, and it just said, "Is this Dan from Spider Talk?" And I was like, oh. And of course, you know me, like the Hollywood Reporter, I turned it into a gig writing for the Village Voice. And before long, Alan and I became friends, and we had Alan on the show. And then before you know it, wedding related, we had a bachelor party with you and me and Brian Jacob and Alan Scherstl in New York.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about this with Brian earlier, too. But, I mean, yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, there were wheat cakes and sausage and beer and really beautiful women in German beer garden attire, but all we could talk about were our damn comics and movies and nerd things, because we are who we are to our last breath, Dan. But it's funny. Your connection to Alan also gave me a connection to Alan, and I've met Alan for lunch a couple times because he's right in the city where I am, near where I work, and he's just a great personality. Just a wonderful person to have connected to the show. As I mentioned in our segment with Brian, I've always for the longest time, I was always being a little reluctant to getting other voices onto the show unless they were a creator. And, certainly Brian helped break that wall down for me, and Alan did as well, in terms of, just bringing in other people on who could provide insights. Maybe I'm just protective of what you and I bring to the table, Dan, but I think I've learned that other people can do it as well. And in that vein, the other person, of course, is our good friend Zeke, who he came on when we were doing the Essential, the No One Dies issues, and then shortly after that, Zeke, I get this email from Zeke, "Hey, I'm going to be coming to New York for a week. Can we hang out?" So, and it actually coincided with when my book had come out. So I was doing a very informal release party, if you will, near where I live in Brooklyn, with some friends and family. Dan, sadly, you couldn't come out for that, but it's okay because you were about to get married a couple of weeks later, so understandable.
I was a little busy.
Yeah, you're a little busy. And, so Zeke came out that week, and we had lunch a couple times, and then he came by the book signing. He got himself a book, and then he wanted to buy a book because he was about to meet Dan Slott, writer of Amazing Spider-Man at the time, for a comic book signing, and he wanted to give a book to Dan Slott and get Dan Slott sign his book. So I mean, meeting Zeke in person, he's just a wonderful person. I mean, my wife to this day talks about him nonstop, about what a great guy he is.
You're not going to get away with this without telling the Zeke meeting Dan Slott story.
Well, so let's also, so Zeke, we haven't made it. It's no secret that we've wanted Dan Slott on Amazing Spider Talk for years. I mean, and it just hasn't worked out, and we don't necessarily have to get into the weeds of that. But Zeke said when he got the copy of the book, he was like, "Well, I'll bring up the blog, and I'll show him where he is in the book, because there's a chapter in my book dedicated all about Dan Slott." And I said, "Do what you want to do, Zeke. I don't think it's going to make a difference." And, I think Dan Slott's chapter 63 or 64 in the book or something, because, the book is ranked 1 to 100 in terms of, critical importance to the Spider-Man mythos and all that. And, Zeke was like, "I'm going to have him sign his chapter." I'm like, "All right, do it." And he comes back and he tells me that apparently he gives Dan Slott the book, and Dan didn't know what the book was, and shows him where he is in the book and explains why he is where he is. And Dan Slott goes, "I'm 64? That's all I am? Well, if you're going to put me in the 60s, at least make me 69 or something like that."
That's a great anecdote.
And it's like, okay.
I got to meet Zeke myself out in Los Angeles, and that was really fun. And I guess the people who don't know Zeke or Alan, the big takeaway is it's great to make friends through the show. That's been a big boon for us. And even this weekend, we've made some new friends here at Mohegan Sun for Terrificon, and really that's the biggest and best part of doing the show.
Hold on, Dan. Speaking of friends, I think someone's about to buzz on in.
reanimated Nazi skeleton. A reanimated Nazi skeleton. Reviewing B titles while he's covered in bees. Reviewing B titles while he's covered in bees. Actually, he's permanently covered in bees. Actually, he's permanently covered in bees. He's coming for this podcast, he's coming for you. He's coming for this podcast, he's coming for you. It's time for Swarm's B title reviews. It's time for Swarm's B title reviews.
It is I, Swarm. You think you got rid of me?
I was not prepared for this.
This is fake news. You put beer in front of me that you're going to get me buzzed, and I'll just say whatever I want.
Swarm, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for the live appearance of you. You were supposed to be in Marc's apartment, and that's it.
No collusion.
Okay, well, there we go. This is terrible improv because I was not ready for that. Well, there you go. There you have it. Swarm, everyone. Speaking of Swarm, God, I hate to do that. Swarm made an appearance in the past 100. He started being a guest on our show. He retired Flash, or he went wherever Flash went to rehab, I'm guessing.
Okay, well,
Is he dead now?
You want me to bring him back, too? Because I can bring him back.
Well, I mean, I thought he was killed.
That's true. Okay.
All right, well, rest in peace, Flash.
There you go.
That's in canon for our show. Flash is now dead. But yeah, Swarm made a delightful appearance. We had this awesome voting thing where we got to experience all kinds of different characters, from Deb Whitman to Swarm to Lonesome Pincus. In fact, I think I still have that song that Lonesome Pincus sang for us. Let's hear it, Lonesome.
Oh, give me a word with a couple of nerds who sit there and talk Spidey all day. For Uncle Ben's sage advice is awfully nice until he gets killed by a bird of prey. Flash Thompson's reviews, where the guest host drinks way too much booze, where Marc's bank account makes a claim that annuals don't count, and Dan gives him tons of abuse.
Another really cool get that we got on the show in the past 100 episodes was, obviously, we've had John Semper Jr., who's become a friend of mine over the past few years. But he came back, and this time he brought along with him the voice of Spider-Man, Christopher Daniel Barnes, which was really neat because that's the voice I hear when I read Spider-Man. I think that's probably true for a lot of people who, grew up watching television shows in the 90s. And he even recorded the coolest bumper for us.
Well, Spider's got to do what a Spider's got to do, Dan.
That is true. That is true of Spiders. Another really great guest who's now kind of become a friend is Marc Guggenheim.
Yeah, I mean, we got to talk a little bit with Marc this weekend a bunch, and but that's all you, Dan. I mean, you played your Hollywood connections and turned that into a really good relationship there too. So.
Well, I'll tell you, it's all about persistence, because when I was working at CBR, they wouldn't really let me come out of my cubicle because, well, that's best left said for another time. But I was leaving, and Marc Guggenheim was leaving at the same time as me, and I kind of bombarded him and was like, hey, I know I work here at CBR, but I really have this other thing called the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. I would love it if you would come on and we could talk about your work on Spider-Man. And he was like, oh, I'm being bombarded right now, but okay. And he invited me to the DC, Arrowverse writing studios, where I got to go in and see all the writers and hang out in the writers' room, and he invited me into his office with all of his toys and everything, and I got an interview with Marc Guggenheim right there in person, which was one of our first real non-convention in-person interviews. And ever since then, Marc has been a great supporter of the show, and you couldn't ask for a nicer guy, and that was really neat.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, I think one of our other very memorable interviews over the last 100 episodes, not quite going to the DC studios in Hollywood level of glamour here, but certainly one of the more memorable experiences, maybe on the back end in terms of the sausage making end, was our interview with Spider-Man artist, Marvel Comics art. Well, comic book artist Ron Garney. And Dan, Do you have any succinct description of what the Ron Garney experience was?
Well, I'll say this. What you hear on the show is never a raw feed. You know, like, I take these things and I chop them to bits sometimes and really shape up some of these interviews and even our conversation, Mark, to kind of make it a little bit, snappier and quick and fun and less full of ums, which I think everybody on the planet probably is thankful for. Although we're not that bad anymore. We've certainly gotten better. But there I go. Ron Garney was one of the more interesting interviews because Ron Garney, I think, was trying to play with the looseness of the format a little bit and the seriousness with which our show is conducted. He would succinctly slip into other people's voices in the middle of the interview. There's a famous bumper that he did for us, which sounds like he's dying, and I will play it right now. I've never played it on the show before. I'll play it here, and you can get a taste of what was going on behind the scenes.
Hello, everybody. This is Ron Garney, and I drew Spider-Man for Marvel Comics, and you're listening to the amazing Spider Talk. Hello out there. This is Ron Garney. I drew the amazing Spider-Man, and you're listening to the amazing Spider Talk.
Well, Dad, I won't be going to sleep tonight now.
One of the other most fun interviews we ever done was Howard Mackey and Terry Kavanagh to talk about the much beloved / maligned Clone Saga. It's one of those weird interviews because it's kind of universally accepted that people don't like the Clone Saga for the most part.
Yeah.
And so how do you conduct that interview without being like, hey, we know that people don't like this? Because we try to be fair to our opinions on stuff. We don't always glow about people's work. But when the base level of understanding is that people don't like this thing, you have to treat it with a different kind of brush. And I think these two guys were the perfect guys to take that kind of criticism. You want to get into that?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually it was one of my favorite interviews we've conducted on this show, Dan. And to be honest, it kind of it was another one of those happenstance situations for us. I had Facebook friended Howard Mackey, and for various reasons was trying to get him on the show to talk about the Clone Saga, and his attitude was like, look, man, I've been talking about the Clone Saga for almost 20 years now. I don't know what else there is to say. And I kind of kept needling him a little bit about it, and he's like, how about this, let's get Terry Kavanagh, who was one of the other writers who worked on the books at the time. Terry and Howard are really close friends, still in touch frequently. He's like, maybe having Terry on will kind of bring some fresh perspective to it, and I think it did. And it's one of those interviews that kind of gets past the negativity of the storyline for a bit, and I felt really kind of peeled back the curtain about what it was working for Marvel at that time in the mid-'90s, when it was really a crazy time for the comic book industry. Because you got to consider, in addition to this crazy story that is, as you so politely said, much maligned at this point in time. Marvel, a few years later, is going through a bankruptcy. You had the comic book speculator bubble bursting that really impacted the industry. Things in terms of the publishing line and distribution, stuff that's upended the industry that it's still kind of dealing with to this day. And these two are talking about it in the context of Spider-Man comics, and it just led this kind of raw honesty and sincerity, which, and it's not to say that our other creator interviews don't have honesty and sincerity to it, but this is, to me, kind of, especially since this was a pivotal point in my own fandom, kind of hearing, what it was like behind the scenes at this time was really revealing to me, and kind of really made me appreciate them both as creators, but also as human beings, which kind of plays into what we were talking about earlier in terms of, dealing with people not just as legends or whatever, but just as people.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about that episode, and I think for a lot of the interviews, is that we often have to kind of put ourselves in the back seat. As much as this episode is about us talking about ourselves, which is really unusual for us, that episode really worked because we really sat back and let them talk to each other, and I got the real sense that they worked through something about the Clone Saga with each other and kind of came to peace with what that story was in a lot of ways, in a way that I think they were having a revelation about it. About it on the show, and that's always great. I love when we can get those moments that are unique to our show, like say Nick Spencer and Steve Lieber talking for the first time on our episode about superior foes. One of the things that I think has really been interesting about the show is kind of how much it is like these interviews. A lot of the elements of the show are purely coincidental. How things work out. It's kind of like Slumdog Millionaire, where like the kid only can answer the questions because of something very, very specific that happened in his life. And there's been so many instances where we just so happen to manage to get the interview to happen because we just so happen to talk to the right person at the right time to facilitate the right thing. And for me, like the Ralph Bakshi interview was one of the most like strangely discovered interviews on our show. Like that only happened because I happened to teach his grandson in my film class, and I recognized the last name and was like, is your grandfather the animator Ralph Bakshi? And he was like, yeah, how do you know him? I'm like, well, I'm a big fan of his films, not even thinking about the Spider-Man element of it. And like minutes later it clicked to me, oh my gosh, he directed seasons 2 and 3 of the Spider-Man 67 TV show. And so I probably like unprofessionally asked my student, hey, can you get me the email to your grandfather? And he was like, sure. And so like that, and then we did the interview, and I sent it to my student, and I was like, you should listen to this interview with your grandfather and learn more about him, because he had no idea of his grandfather's legacy. And actually, I haven't said to you yet, last week he emailed me, this student, and said, I really want to start my own podcast now about my grandfather and his work. And so in a way, it inspired him. But like this has been true for so many of our interviews and stuff, that they wouldn't have happened if not for some random series of circumstances that allowed for it to occur. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is like favorite episode of the past 100 episodes. I think we've each chosen one of our favorite episodes that we've done. Do you want to start off? Which one was your favorite?
Yeah, I think one of probably there's a lot to talk of. Like I said, I really loved the Howard Mackey, Terry Kavanaugh interview, and when we had Ryan Stegman back on a second time to talk about Renew Your Vows, I thought that was a really worthwhile interview. But for me, and again, I feel like this kind of started the trend of what we were talking about, of having people come on to talk about not necessarily their work, but just their relationship to comics and to other people who worked in comics. To kick off just our second season of the newly reformatted Amazing Spider Talk, we had Jerry Conway come back on. I think this was his third or fourth visit on the show.
Fourth time.
Yeah, so certainly no stranger to the show. But to talk about John Romita, and like I felt like we tried to get just to peel back the curtain a bit again. We tried to get Romita on our show, and we reached out through various outlets, and basically the conclusion to that was that he wasn't looking to do interviews anymore, and who can blame him? The guy's been in the limelight for so long, and now he's out of it, and he probably wants to stay there, and we get it. Like that's I don't take offense to that. As great as our show is, Dan, but Jerry was somebody who had worked with John on Amazing Spider-Man and at Marvel for over the years. Both as I think he saw John as a bit of a mentor in terms of again, Jerry was 18 when he started working on Amazing Spider-Man, so to have someone like John Romita as your mentor, I'm sure would be great, and kind of having Jerry on to bring those perspectives and talk about it, and to break down the myth element of it, and just talk about these people, this great creator as a human being. I just had a lot of fun recording that episode. I felt it was really just a great way to kick off the season, and it's kind of stuff that I really have been striving to achieve in our show since.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. That was a great episode, and my favorite episode of the past 100 episodes is very similar. And it's funny that our favorite episodes have very little of us in it, because I think really that you and I love learning about Spider-Man, and when we're talking, we're learning about each other and our feelings about Spider-Man, and we've certainly done a lot of research that we want to communicate. But when we have these people on, we're really kind of getting the primo stuff, you know? And for me, my favorite episode was the Ditko Shrugged episode from last season, and where we really got into the details of who Ditko was as a person, as an artist. And we had our guest Nick Caputo on that show, and Ron Friends, longtime friend Ron Friends. And Nick Caputo was an incredible fountain of knowledge about Ditko as a man. And to me, that was kind of the best that we do on this show, is kind of, like you said, breaking these people away from the myth and allowing the truth of who they actually are to come out. And if we don't know, not embellishing and creating something that we don't know about. It's saying, I don't know this about this person. And Ditko is certainly someone that you could kind of not really know. Which is why I wanted to do the tribute episode in kind of a broad fashion, because I was like, none of us really know Ditko. So it's unfair of us to really talk about him than how we experienced him, not who he was. I don't know a ton about his political beliefs, and I've heard about it, but I can't really definitively say, even from the letter that I sent him. It gives me a brief window, but not really. But that episode really allowed us to get in, and then to balance his historical angle from Nick Caputo, I thought the Ron Friend stuff about his artistry was so full of heart and charm, everything we love Ron Friends for, but it really showed in as crystallized form as I could possibly find the impact that this man had on this community in a way that us as non-artists can't possibly understand or communicate. And Ron put it the best way I've ever experienced. And so that episode to me was really a hallmark of our show and what we're doing with our new format.
Absolutely.
Well, that's about it for all of our reminiscing. I hope you guys enjoyed that in some regard. It's certainly been fun for us to kind of think back on the past 3 years of the show. Obviously we asked for some of your feedback, but we'd still love to hear from you guys about what you think about the show and memories you've had that go alongside ours. One of the best things about the show, obviously, is all of our amazing interviews, and we got a ton of them here at Mohegan Sun for Terrificon this weekend, right, Marc?
Absolutely. I mean, these are creators past and present, and some people that surprised us in how they wanted to talk to us, and some people that, I think in the moment we didn't even realize we were going to be talking to over the last 2 days. So, Dan, I mean, why don't we just let these creators go at it, and just let our listeners just relish in that.
Well, thank you again, everybody, for supporting us the past 100 episodes. We'll be back at the end of the episode, but enjoy these interviews.
All right, Dan. So we got through the real introspective period of the show, so hopefully everyone's still with us. Or maybe you just skipped ahead in 15-second increments on your iPod, listener. iPod. Whoa, who has an iPod? On your iPhone or listening device. So let's now get to some of the other great content we got at Terrificon. Dan, it's worth noting that none of this would have been possible without the support of Mitch Halleck and the Terrificon crew for providing us with the press passes we needed for access into the show. It allowed us to talk to these creators. Thanks again, Mitch and Terrificon, for all of your help.
And also for lining up such an amazing gallery of Spider-Man creators.
Yes, Mitch is definitely a big Spider-Man fan. He admitted as much, and certainly the guest list showed it. I mean, unfortunately, we couldn't talk to every single creator we wanted to, but, we certainly got some good names on tap here from Spider-Man history. And we're actually going to kick things off with the most recent edition, and this kind of came out of nowhere our first day at the con, Dan. I mean, we've been chit-chatting with the current Amazing Spider-Man scribe, Nick Spencer, about trying to get a one-on-one, or I guess a one-on-two interview for the show. And we knew he was going to be at this event, and there were some concerns that, in the context of a con, it probably wouldn't be great to do a big interview. But We got there on the first Friday that we were there, and Nick had a bit of a lull at his table. So while this may not be the big deep dive that we still hope to get at some point, I would say that this was a pretty good scratch at the surface of what's been going on with Amazing Spider-Man the last few months. So let's get right into Nick Spencer.
So we're on the floor at Terrificon here at the Mohegan Sun Convention Center, and we are here with the Amazing Spider-Man's newest ongoing writer, Nick Spencer. Nick, thank you so much for joining us here.
Guys, thanks for having me.
Nick, how crazy is it to hear that you are the writer of Amazing Spider-Man? I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you, but what was it like to kind of facilitate that process of picking up that role? How long was it in the works? And tell us more about your feelings about getting that spot.
Yeah, it's definitely still taking some getting used to. It's a little surreal whenever you hear somebody say it back to you. So, but I'm loving it. In terms of how it happened, Axel Alonso gave me a call back as I was wrapping up on Captain America, and we just had a conversation about what I'd be interested in doing next. And he mentioned a few possibilities. One of them was the Amazing Spider-Man. I was like, I'm just going to stop you right there. That's all I'm interested in doing. Thanks for all the other offers, but that's my dream job. That's the book that I really want to do. When I had first signed at Marvel, I guess about 7-8 years ago, I had dinner with C.B. Cebulski, who was in charge of talent management at the time, and he said, what do you want to do at Marvel? And usually, like when you're starting out, you say, well, I'd like to do a Cloak and Dagger mini or a Nick Fury mini. You think small and humble and something nobody's doing. And I told CB, I said, I want to write Spider-Man. That's why I'm here. So, years later, to have this opportunity and to be able to actually do it, to be able to write this book that, is really, what I've always wanted to write my entire career, it's a huge thrill. It's a big honor. I
mean, in addition to, obviously, Amazing Spider-Man, it's one of the, flagship books of the Marvel publishing line, but, you come after, a very significant creator run in terms of Dan Slott. So despite the fact that this was what you've longed for so long, I mean, how was it kind of transitioning from Dan Slott, who really took the character in some really creative and crazy directions, to be coming in and being like, all right, what am I going to do with this character now? Look, I am so in awe of what Dan has accomplished on this book. I mean, to have written, I believe it's 600, 700, and 800 are all Dan Slott comics. It's unprecedented. It's unheard of in this day and age for a creator to have a run like that. It's just a testament to what a fantastic writer he is and how great a fit he was for the book. And he was so wonderful to me during the transition, and he knows I'm a big admirer of his stuff, and he said some very kind stuff about my work. So it was a pretty easy handover. Once you have the book, I don't really think that much about that any more than I think about, Stan's run or Roger Stern's run or anybody's run. Like if you were looking for a book that hasn't, that doesn't come with pressure, this isn't the one. There have been a lot of great writers with seminal runs on this book, so it's just very cool to be a part of that, and it's an honor to follow in those guys' footsteps.
When we have a little more time, I definitely want to dive into the transition a bit more, but one of the things that I heard was that you went back and reread every Spider-Man comic, or at least something to that manner. I guess I'm curious, well, there's a lot of questions I have about that, but I guess the most basic one I could ask is, what were the biggest things you gleaned from going through a run of that size?
Well, first off, I'm so embarrassed by that generally, because, it's very true. I mean, I spent months and months doing nothing but reading Spider-Man comics for work, and that's a pretty great gig. But people have mentioned that a lot, and I should really point out, despite reading all that stuff, if we were playing Spider-Man trivia, Dan Slott would beat me, 3 times a day.
I'm not surprised.
So I don't mean to pass myself off as the world's new reigning expert on all things Spidey. And it's fun because now I come to shows and stuff, and people are constantly trying to trip me up. They're like, hey, did you read this one? Or did you, and sometimes I have, sometimes I haven't. But, Marvel Unlimited's such a fantastic resource now that, you can tear through a lot very easily and very quickly.
Is that the primary resource for a Marvel writer, or do they give you access to some Indiana Jones-esque archives?
They'll give you whatever you ask for, but really Unlimited's gotten to the point where it has most of it. So, other than some gaps here and there, which, I also, bought up all the essentials and everything. So, any gaps that there were in, Spectacular or Web of or Team Up, I had those in black and white as well. So I could jump back and forth on those. But then, there were a lot of smaller, shorter series as well, and Unlimited's just great for that, you don't have to worry about the thing being in print or whatever. So I read a lot. That was the luxury of this job, was that I had a lot of time to plan and a lot of time to research, and it definitely has served us well so far, I think.
Nick, not to get too into the weeds on what you've done so far with the character, but it's kind of been on our minds since reading issue 1, considering that Mary Jane and Peter together has kind of been the third rail of Spider-Man comics for the better part of a decade. What kind of voodoo curse did you put on Marvel Editorial to be able to do what you've done so far with them?
Marvel Editorial were really supportive from the start. I've told this story before, but really how it happened is I had turned in an outline for the first issue, and I had pitched the first issue in the room at one of our retreats. Everybody had really loved it. And as it was getting time to get to scripting, I was really nervous about it. It felt good, but it felt like something was missing. I like to open big. I like to have, first issues that make people sit up and talk about the book. And I felt like something wasn't there, that we needed one more beat. And I had dinner with Joe Quesada in Los Angeles, and I sat down with Joe, and we were talking about a variety of things, and it was kind of roundabout. It wasn't really just trying to solve this problem, but Joe was talking about kind of the response and reaction, obviously, to One More Day. Joe said, people think that I'm anti Peter and MJ, and that's not true at all. We undid the marriage, but we never said that they couldn't be back together. And I'd heard that publicly and stuff, but I still just wasn't sure if you actually pitched doing it, how receptive they would be to the idea. But Joe was all for it. And, so was Nick Lowe and C.B. Cebulski. Everybody was really excited about it. And once we locked that into the first issue, I really felt like we had it. And, look, it's a funny thing. I've obviously written stories that, make people very happy, and I've written stories that make people very angry. And what you realize is that all of it's part of the same job. That telling good stories means that sometimes bad things happen to the characters, and it means sometimes good things happen to the characters. And keeping people on that roller coaster is really what we do. And so it was nice to get to do a big surprise that made the fans happy. That is a cool thing. Those are hard to find, I think, but it's still a Spider-Man book. There's still a lot of story to be told, and life's not going to get easy for Peter. But on this front, it's cool to have a piece of the puzzle that the fans seem to have reacted positively to.
There's so many questions I want to ask you about this Mary Jane thing, but I'm going to save for another time, including some harebrained theories that I have about this man in a trench coat with wraps all over him, which I'm sure the result will be maybe equally harebrained as my theories.
Pretty mysterious.
Okay, one last question amongst 100 other I want to ask, but we run a fan podcast for Spider-Man, and one of the things that has always been a goal of ours is to kind of help fan relationships between the fans and the creators, and it's something that I know that you've personally dealt with. I want to know, what can we do as fans to kind of help facilitate your process or the community? What do you think the Spider-Man community could use a little bit more of, I guess?
Well, I think it's the same thing with any character, but I think with Spidey you're talking about an especially passionate fan base. I think that like I was saying before, I think really the key is understanding that part of our job is introducing conflict and adversity into these characters' lives, that it can't always be happy endings for the characters. And what I see more and more of in fandom is creators being personally targeted and attacked whenever they do something to a character that people are fond of, and that makes me really sad. I that's not how it should be. So I think any efforts to push back on that kind of thing, on the kind of personalization of outrage in terms of what happens to these characters is I think a welcome thing. The reality is, we really are all fans of these characters, all of us that write these stories. That I've genuinely never met a superhero comics writer that couldn't talk your ear off about superheroes and about the characters that they're writing. And it makes me a little sad that I think that there's an assumption that there's no way that we could love these characters as much as the fans, because then how would we cast them in a less than flattering light, or how would we let something bad happen to the characters? And that's just kind of the endless push and pull of it. But ultimately it is a sign of what we've built, and how passionate people are about these books, and that's a good thing.
Great. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
All right, Marc, this next guest, I'm going to let you really explain, because this has kind of been your white whale for such a long time. And, I think we haven't really talked about it, maybe even in the past 100 episodes of the show, because it was a topic that you and I thought would never happen and was kind of putting it to rest. But I think the minute we saw this guest lineup at this convention, we had one goal in our minds. I think most people would think, oh, that would be Nick Spencer. But I think for both of us, this interview that I still have a hard time believing that we got, if it weren't for the audio files on my computer. Why don't you talk about who this person is and why this is such a special thing to you?
Yeah, well, Dan, I mean, anyone who's been listening to us since close to the beginning, I mean, certainly since we released a wave of interviews from Connecticut, before it was Terrificon, it was Connecticut Comic-Con 5 years ago, knows that I have a bit of an obsession with the original Hobgoblin story from the 1980s and how the reveal of the character as Ned Leeds was pretty much botched, I would say. And, over the years, we've talked to Jim Salicrup about it. We've talked to Tom DeFalco. We've talked to Ron Frenz. I emailed, interviewed Roger Stern, on and on and on. But the one person that I was never able to talk to about it was the Spider book editor at the time, Jim Owsley. Now, Jim Owsley has not gone by that name in a number of years. He's best known today as Christopher Priest, who people who have followed the Black Panther franchise might know. Priest had a very historic run writing Black Panther for Marvel in the early 2000s. And since the movie came out earlier this year, has kind of been closely associated with the character, so much so that even his business cards have the movie Black Panther on it. As it stands, so we saw Christopher Priest on this guest list. And I think it's also worth noting, Dan, that Christopher has a blog. I think it's ChristopherPriest.com or something to that effect. And on that blog, he has this article. And Dan, do you want to say what that article, what the title of that article is?
The article is called "Why I Don't Talk About Spider-Man."
Yeah, and I mean, and for the record, I mean, the Hobgoblin botched reveal is kind of just, it's a symptom, not a cause. But when Christopher Priest was Jim Owsley in the 80s, he was a young editor at Marvel. He was considered a rising talent by Marvel's editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter. And rather than kind of let Jim work his way up through the ranks, he made him the editor of Marvel's flagship books at the time, under the guise that, he was going to be working alongside guys like Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz, real pros who knew the industry and can kind of, all grow and work together and make this thing happen. And as story has it, and as Priest kind of admits in his own blog, he was not up to the task. He was, kind of in over his head, and he had some issues managing the talent. He clashed with many of the creators. He clashed specifically with DeFalco and Friends during their run on Amazing at the time when they were trying to kind of work on that reveal of the Hobgoblin. I mean, they were intending for the Hobgoblin to be revealed as Richard Fisk, the son of the Kingpin. Apparently, like, there are stories out there that there was stuff being cut out on the cutting room floor, and then famously in the Spider-Man versus Wolverine one-shot, Priest killed off Ned Leeds because he thought DeFalco was going to reveal Ned Leeds as the Hobgoblin, and he just wanted to piss DeFalco off by doing it.
This is the legend, by the way. Like, everybody has a different take.
This is the legend, but we have people on our show, like you can go back to the Peter David interview from New York Comic Con, and Peter paraphrases his conversation with Priest, where Priest basically tells him, "I want to piss Tom DeFalco off." So it's very fascinating. So we saw Priest was going to be on this guest list, and then Dan, in a kind of serendipitous moment, a couple of weeks before the show happened, we got to look at the Spider solicits, and I believe you tweeted it out to me. And what was that tweet, Dan?
I think I texted you, Mark. I'm about to blow your mind. And I sent you the Spider Force, solicit, this new book. Christopher Priest is writing a Spider-Man book. This is our in.
Yes. So, we went into Terrificon with a very definitive strategy. We wanted to talk to the man who said, "I don't talk about Spider-Man anymore." So let's at least start it off by talking about his new book about Spider-Man. And if things seem to be going well, we could start asking him about 80 Spider-Man. And, well, you can judge for yourselves how the interview went, everyone.
We're here again on the floor of Terrificon here at Mohegan Sun, and we are here with Christopher Priest, who probably is best known for his work with Black Panther. But since we are the Spider-Man podcast, we're gonna grill him about his history with Spider-Man. But why don't we start with the newest material, Christopher? We saw that you are attached to I guess it's a limited series that's coming out in a couple of months.
An extremely limited series, and thank God for that.
Okay, so Spider Force is the name of it, I believe, and I'm just curious. So how did this come about? What's going on, and what can you tell us about the book?
I couldn't tell you how it came about, other than that I was snuck into the Marvel Writers Conference. Joe Quesada, I was hanging out with Joe Quesada in New York City. And Joe says, "Hey, let's go over to Marvel. They're having the big super secret conference." So he brought me up there, and I'm in this room full of Marvel writers and editors, and they're all looking at me like, "What's he doing here?" So it's like 50 white guys and me. And then Ta-Nehisi showed up, so I felt better. So there was two of us there. So I think just me showing up at Marvel when I've been at DC for so long sparked some interest, and when people kind of realized, oh, he's not exclusive to DC. I've never been exclusive to DC. Okay, well, why not do something up here? I don't know. So anyway, a week or two later, I got a call, and he said, thus and so. And I had no idea what he was talking about. He was talking about something called Spider-Verse. And they were doing a sequel to Spider-Verse. And I went, well, what's Spider-Verse? And we went out to dinner. I'm sorry, I'm talking like an idiot now. We went out to dinner with the group, and I met this guy named Dan Slott. And Dan Slott sat down next to me, and for like the next hour told me the history of everything I've missed since I left Spider-Man, which was a lot. The whole the Superior Spider, the Scarlet Spider, the Aunt May Spider, and all this stuff. And I was like, this is insane, And then I learned about the Spider verse, and all these different characters, and I was just getting dizzy. But anyway, they asked me to do this, and foolishly I said yes. And it's fun, it's interesting. It's just, I got a lot of catching up to do, fellas. It's been 20 years.
Yeah.
And learning who, and they got who are these characters, and why, and Doc Ock, and it's been very strange. So.
Well, we were very pleased to see that. Like, the minute I saw the solicit with your name on it, I texted him and I said, "I'm about to blow your mind. Christopher Priest is writing a Spider-Man book." Do you see this as like an opportunity to a return in a larger way for you to Marvel?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to see. it's nice to be back on the block again, certainly. But I've been doing, I did the Inhumans once in Future King. I did that for them last year.
Yeah.
I'm doing some little things off and on with them. There's some other stuff coming up that I can't discuss right now. But I don't know. I wouldn't make any sweeping proclamations about a return to Marvel. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Cool.
Well, more focused on Spider-Man. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, what's it like for you to be returning to this character? Like you said, I mean, you were a group editor in what was it, the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious. What was it like for you to kind of go back to this character? I know I've looked into your time at Marvel. I know, like, on your website you have some stuff about your time as group editor, and I just curious, was this kind of mixed emotions, or are you just ready to just dive back in and tackle this character again?
It was mostly just bewilderment and confusion.
Okay.
Because it's not Peter, and if it was Peter, I'd have to go to Spider School. And I told the editor, Nick Lowe, I told him, you got to take me to Spider School because the character's changed so much, has been through so much. And last time I looked, he was married, and now he's not married. And Mephisto, there was a lot. I've missed a lot. So it's a real challenge, and it's very daunting because so much has transpired between then and now. So I don't really feel like I'm really returning to Spider-Man per se, because all these characters that are in Spider-Force are very different. Peter is not in this book, so these are very different characters and a very different experience, including two characters that I'm creating from the ground up.
Well, I mean, I know when you were group editor, so looking at the time you're familiar with in terms of the character, one of kind of your hallmarks as editor was the three books at the time. From our understanding, we've talked to Peter David and Tom Falcone around Friends. They were meant to be like different kind of tones and personalities. Webber
Exactly.
was kind of. So I mean, what was kind of your I guess your approach with that, and do you feel like ultimately those books achieved the vision you wanted them to achieve during that time?
For better, for worse, the problem was that you have a monthly deadline, so you make stuff as good as you can by that date. It's that simple. So you do your best effort. We had a mandate from the publishing arm to publish 3 times a month, three Spider-Man titles a month, plus specials and so forth like that. So I felt like my task was to model the creative to fit that profile. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to be doing these 3 Spider books, let's make them distinctive enough that we give the reader, the fan, a reason to pick up all 3. So the Amazing Spider-Man was our anchor book. Tom DeFalco was our main writer, our lead writer. So Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Joe Rubenstein, that was our anchor team. So we were going to follow where Tom leads. There was no one better at it than those 3 people working on that book, and Joe Rosen, the letterer, and so forth. So for Peter Parker, I wanted a completely different tone. And how do we distinguish that? So in the Peter Parker book, those stories took place mostly at night, and for the most part he wore the black costume, while in Amazing he wore the traditional costume. And then in Web of Spider-Man, all that stuff took place out of town. He was always out of town somewhere, so those were fish out of water stories, and done by Marc Silvestri and David Michelinie. So for a while I thought we had the dream team working on this on the franchise, and that we distinguished the 3 titles from each other and gave people a reason to pick up all 3 rather than just make it Spider-Man Weekly and force people to pick up all of them.
And kind of in the same vein at that time, now the listeners of our show are going to probably laugh as I ask you this question. I have a bit of an obsession with the Hobgoblin story and how that culminated over that time. And I'm curious, I've talked to various people who've been involved with it because it kind of came to a head during that era there. Do you have any recollection of what was going on with that character at that point? Because, everyone seems to say, I had a different idea and I wanted it to be this person and I was going to do this and then this happened and I was unable to do that with this character. Do you remember what you wanted, what you thought was the direction for the character and where you wanted it to go? Or was what happened ultimately with Ned Lee that you thought what was your
Well, no, there's a couple of points in my life, in my professional career, where something I written was taken out of context and used for the exact opposite purpose for which it was intended. For example, detouring to Black Panther for a second, I wrote this bit of business between Black Panther and Storm where they knew each other's kids, and riding off of Chris Claremont's story from some time before. And the whole point of their relationship was that these two people would never get together, but they would be like this love that could never really happen, because if it did, it wouldn't work. And then when I left the book, the first thing I did was marry him. Right. So in Spider-Man versus Wolverine, that's exactly what I did. The whole point of the B story in Spider-Man Wolverine was, here's why Mary Jane and Peter Parker must never marry. And that was the B story there. And that motivated Peter to take the job and go out of town and get involved with all this stuff in Berlin. And then, of course, I left the company. I left editorial anyway. And immediately after that, they used that as an excuse to marry them. But I said, well, no, that's not what, go back, read that story. That's not what that story says. Okay? So now we got Hobgoblin. And in that same book, in Spider-Man Wolverine, we had Ned Leeds is killed off panel in that book. And then after the fact, somebody else decided that Ned was the Hobgoblin. Ned was never the Hobgoblin. Okay, I was the editor. I didn't know who the Hobgoblin is. The only guy who knew who the Hobgoblin is down at the end of this row here. His name is Roger Stern. Right. Roger Stern was the only guy who knew who Hobgoblin was. And I never intended for Ned Leeds to be the Hobgoblin. And I want to go on record with that, sir, because I'm being blamed with that. And in fact, Roger was furious with me for a long time. And I went, my name's not on that book. Okay, I was long gone. Somebody pulled the trigger on that. And that wasn't me. Ned was never supposed to be Hobby. At the time, it was so much fun playing the guessing game, and they played it so well. So all Tom DeFalco did, I don't think Tom knew either. I think all we did was kind of run stuff by Roger so we don't accidentally step on who the real Hobgoblin was. And as long as we got a thumbs up through people who actually did know, then we just played the game. But that's not how I wanted it to end, and it's been more than once where some large happening in continuity has taken place when my story was actually the exact opposite of what that was supposed to be.
It took over a decade for Roger to come back and really clear it all up. Were you aware of any more immediate plans to clear up and demystify the person under that mask?
Oh no, I think, once I, stepped away from the Spider-Man universe as either editor or writer, I just stopped paying attention. And then I was out of comics for a long time because I wasn't being offered any of this stuff. And I was like, well, why am I keeping up with continuity on Superman or Batman or Spider-Man for that matter if I'm not going to be offered that work? And if every time I turn around, the companies are invalidating the continuity anyway, and they're just going to reboot every couple of years, why follow this stuff? So I had no idea, how they ultimately resolved that or what happened after that.
I know you mentioned with Spider-Force that it's, you needed a Spider-Man kind of history lesson, so to speak, since you left the books. But you obviously you're known as a writer who very on a character in his universe, and if you were ever to fully get the history of Spider-Man, of everything that's happened, and since you left, do you have any desire to make a stamp on that character again, or similar to like what you did with Black Panther? I mean, just kind of, I don't know, so that Christopher Priest is really associated as much with Spider-Man as he is Black Panther. Do you think you're interested? Or
I had dinner with Dan Slott, and when Dan kind of walked me through in a brilliant way, just like a Reader's Digest version of all this stuff, I just looked at him and I wanted to quit comics forever. Because first of all, I think Dan is brilliant. The stuff this guy came up with, I don't know him personally. I just met him for the first time, and I went, oh man, that is so brilliant. I would have. I looked up. I would have never thought that up. That whole Superior Spider-Man thing was just freaking brilliant.
It's cool.
And I just want to leave the country now. I don't, no. I get asked about Black Panther as well. I'm like, Black Panther now belongs to a new generation of writers, and God bless them, and I wouldn't want to come back and compete with myself or, no. Give me Howard the Duck or something, and let's move on.
Was it thrilling to see so much of your invention on Black Panther on the big screen?
It was a very emotional moment for me. Yeah, I was a little speechless. But beyond that, my personal involvement, I was very happy for Don McGregor, who created so much of that infrastructure. I was happy for Ta-Nehisi, obviously, but he's already incredibly successful. So to hell with him, But and then it's difficult to explain, but for most of the African American friends that I have, there's this scene where they arrive in Wakanda for the first time, and they're doing the flyover, and you see these huts and so forth, and then the hologram fades, revealing Wakanda, and the music and that visual, it was tantamount to a religious moment where my eyes welled up with tears, and I almost lost it, because finally we're seeing us in this sort of broad spectrum, and it's not like a bunch of gangsta stuff, or that kind of thing. It's a very positive thing. I think it's got to be like the biggest budget movie ever made with a largely black cast. So it was just an overwhelming and deeply moving moment, not just for me as a writer or a co-creator, but as a person, as an African American. I was really just so pleased with it, and I expressed that to Ryan Coogler when I had the pleasure of meeting him.
He's the nicest guy, too. I got to meet him a few years ago, and what a great guy.
Yeah, but you'd never know that he's like this incredibly successful movie director. You just think he's some dude. He's like, what's up?
He has a very casual way of speaking, yeah.
Exactly. He's very down to earth. Yeah, exactly. But he's also very down to earth,
Yeah.
He's like, I'm sure, Ryan is out there wandering the streets somewhere, hanging out, and you don't even know that's Ryan Coogler.
He's a superhero.
Yeah. Well, now he's getting a little too much profile, so people are starting to recognize him on the street. But I've hung out with like Reginald Hudlin, who is incredibly successful and so forth, but he's not a person that the average person on the street would actually recognize. So he's out with his kids, walking around and doing whatever he's doing. But I'm like, hey, this is the guy that directed the Academy Awards last year.
Well, you just made his day, maybe year. Thanks so much for talking to us. Is there any place that people can find you, follow your work on the internet, maybe something like that?
Well, you can try. I have a website, ChristopherPriest.com. I'm so busy, I'm almost never on it. That there's a blog there, but I eschew social media. I run like the plague, so you're not going to find me on Facebook or any place like that.
It's probably a wise decision.
I want to stay out of trouble, so that kind of thing. But I do have a website up there, and there's a blog there, and I try to show up whenever I have time to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that was an amazing interview that, again, like I said, I still can't believe. If you're listening to this episode and it just goes blank for like 15 minutes, you know that Marc and I just dreamed this whole thing up. But I hope that you heard a Christopher Priest interview in that segment.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I think it pretty much comes across in the interview, Dan, but it's worth noting, could not have met a nicer guy. And it just goes to show that sometimes you just got to ask.
Yeah. And then, funny enough, we walked over to Ron Friends later at the convention after we had announced that we had done this interview, and he had a bone to pick with us.
Yes, yeah. But, I'm assuming Ron was just joshing. So,
so next up, we've got another kind of classic Spider-Man artist known for, I guess, at least with us, a very particular issue of the comic, and that's Bob McLeod, who before the interview we got chit-chatting and wanted to kind of familiarize ourselves, and I had mentioned how much I loved seeing a reference to his artwork from The Commuter Cometh, which is Amazing Spider-Man number 267, and our 7th Essentials comic that we submitted for the Our Essentials list, how much I love seeing a reference to that book in Spider-Man Homecoming, and he admitted he had never seen Spider-Man Homecoming, which to me was a bit of a special moment in that, like, here's this, amazing artist, not even realizing that his art had been translated into the big screen. So to me, that's kind of all you need to know going into this interview. The commuter cometh. We're going to get talking to the guy who drew the darn thing, Bob McLeod.
So we're here again at Terrificon at Mohegan Sun here in Connecticut, about to interview Bob McLeod, who is obviously a very legendary artist for a number of comics over the years, but he also spent some time on Spider-Man in a number of capacities, pencils and inks, right, Bob?
Yeah. Yep.
And, obviously, like I said, you've done a number of issues, but a personal favorite of Dan and mine is the Commuter Cometh issue that you did with Peter David in the 80s. We actually did an Essential Spider-Man review a number of years ago, and the Commuter Cometh made it. It was voted in by our listeners as one of the Essential Spider-Man stories, which is kind of interesting because it's such a unique story versus your more traditional Spider-Man stories. So it's kind of wanted to test your recall a bit, and first of all, do you remember getting that script from Peter? Like, how did it come about to get you on that issue?
I'm not sure. I had done a number of fill-in issues on Spider-Man and the various titles of Spider-Man, and I'm not sure why that one. Maybe I was just around the office at the time that came up. I'm glad I was, because I originally wanted to be a humor artist, and that was kind of a funny story. And so it's really actually my favorite Spider-Man story. So I was, very happy to be working on that issue.
Sounds like a perfect fit. What kind of things did you and Peter discuss when kind of like breaking down the visuals to that story? How did you decide to approach it from a visual standpoint as opposed to maybe doing something more traditional? Did you think?
That was just all up to me. He wrote the script, gave me the script, and all of the visuals were just totally up to me. He didn't give me any direction specifically, but he did ask me to draw his daughter in it. She's the little girl on the big wheel, and he gave me a photo of her to work from.
I'm guessing that's probably a common request from writers to kind of fit people in it?
No, I've never had that before from a writer. I've drawn various people into the comics before, but not by request.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I mean, you mentioned obviously it's a favorite story of yours, and there's just a number of great visual gags in that comic. Do you have one that stands out to you as a favorite of yours, or I mean, is it like picking your favorite child? I mean, how does that work?
You mean from that issue or during my career? Yeah. I love the scene with the Doberman where he webs up the Doberman's mouth. That was fun to do. The leaping into the tree, the couple arguing. There's a lot of scenes in that I really like. The whole issue was fun.
You expressed to us earlier before you recorded that you hadn't seen the Spider-Man Homecoming movie.
Right.
I think, I don't want to speak for you, Mark, but my favorite gag in the comic is him firing his web into nothingness where there's no building. Yeah. In the movie, he goes to a golf course when he's on a chase with the Vulture and does the exact same thing with the web firing into nothing. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm excited to tell you that your joke made it into the movie, but I have to ask, was that your joke, something you designed, or was that Peter David?
No, that was in the script. Yeah, that was in the script. He's a funny writer. He's got a good sense of humor. I think everything like that was probably in the script. I don't remember making up any jokes of my own, just interpreting the script in a humorous way. Yeah. He told me, it's been a long time ago, but my memory is that he told me to have fun with it.
Cool.
I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, you filled in a lot on issues over the years. I'm curious. I mean, did you ever, looking back, kind of wish you had more of a sustained run with the character? I mean, do you have? I mean, you're known obviously for a lot of the X universe material. Spider-Man is obviously a little different than the X-Men. X-Men probably, in some ways, more popular than Spider-Man, at least while you were working on them. I mean, did you wish you could have done a little more with Spider-Man, or did you just get enough for yourself?
No, I would have loved to. He's one of my favorites. I like the whole crew there, Jonah Jameson and MJ and all that. My interest in drawing comics was the characters rather than the battles and all the superheroics and all that stuff. Like I say, my background is more with humor, and I like the people interacting is where I had my fun. It just never really worked out. I was busy on other series, or they had regular artists at the time. I just ended up doing a lot of fill-ins instead of being the regular artist on the book, just out of that's the way it worked out.
We're on our second season of our show, and we've been talking about the Stan Lee run where he, worked with Ditko and then Romita, and we're kind of asking everybody, and I don't know how, where that run is in your heart or anything, but is there, when you think of a Spider-Man comic by Stan Lee, is there a storyline that comes to mind to you that's a favorite?
No, actually, I missed that whole Marvel revolution in the 60s. I was reading Mad Magazine back then. I wasn't reading Marvel comics. As a kid, I was reading some Superman comics and the Harvey line of comics, Archie comics, but I missed that whole thing. I didn't read Marvel comics until I got in the business, really, right? Oh, wow. Like as I was trying to get in the business. And I got some Marvel comics and looked at them and tried to do my best to, get a job at Marvel. But I had not read practically any of those issues with Ditko and Stan. I was all catch up later after I was already working on the books.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us about one of our favorite issues.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Dan, next up, we're going to flash forward a little bit, if you see what I did there. To the brand new day era of Amazing Spider-Man with another classic artist. We're talking with Barry Kitson, who kind of has a sporadic array of Spider-Man issues during that run, but probably most memorable of which was Amazing Spider-Man number 574, which was the flashback story of Flash Thompson in Iraq. And again, Barry Kitson, I mean, everyone we talked to was great. I mean, don't get me wrong, but Barry, I think he just seemed legitimately intrigued by just talking to us about the art and some of these stories and where it came from. And it was just such a truly enjoyable conversation with him. So why don't we go right to it?
Hey everybody, it's Dan again, and we're here at Terrificon, and we're sitting down with none other than Barry Kitson, artist on many books, including Amazing Spider-Man, and we're going to ask him a few questions about his time on that book. So Barry, before we get into any specific details, I guess I'm curious, in regards to your style when working on a Spider-Man book, what Spider-Man artist, if any, do you draw inspiration from for the character?
It's a good question. I think I'm like a bit of a sponge. I draw inspiration from everyone in some way or other. Probably with Spider-Man, Ditko would always be my go-to reference. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any other one stands out above all others. I love loads of people's different versions of him. I love Gil Kane's version of Spider-Man. Rick Leonardi is great. Sort of more recently, I think Joe Quesada does a great version of Spider-Man. That's why I always hate saying favourites. In about an hour, I'm going to remember 5 people I've dissed by not remembering their names, and then, why didn't I say him? But Ditko is my go-to kind of reference.
Spider-Man's not short on great artists working on that book, that's for sure.
That's true. One of the nice things about it is, you could go anywhere in the world and say, oh yeah, I'm drawing Spider-Man, and people instantly know exactly what you're talking about, and they're excited about it. It's kind of my go-to sketch if I meet people on a plane or something and say, oh, can you do a sketch for my children or whatever? I'll always do Spidey because everybody's always going to recognize him.
Right.
So Barry, you did a lot of your work during the Brand New Day era of Amazing Spider-Man, and we've been fortunate enough to have a number of the writers during that era to come in and talk to us a little bit about the process that was involved in putting that book together 3 times a month. But I'm curious from the artistic perspective, because we've not heard a lot from pencilers and inkers who were working on the book. What kind of pressures was that on the artistic side, especially with these kind of frenetic deadlines and rotating creators and different people were assigned to different storylines, and it just seemed like there was a potential for a lot of chaos?
Yes, there certainly was potential for a lot of chaos. I mean, it was good fun. I mean, it was hectic, but it was good fun. I mean, occasionally you thought you were going to draw one story and you ended up drawing another one. Like there was one issue, I think Mike McLeod did about 5 or 6 pages, and then I ended up doing the last 15 or 16. But that's always fun, It's the collaboration in comics is always what makes it good fun, and the stories were fun. The writers were great to work with. Dan Slott was really good fun to work with. It was just a great, it was a good fun time. It was a great time.
And of course, like one of the big issues that you worked on was the flashback, the Flash Thompson military story.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most commented on stories I've ever done, I think.
Yeah, and we about a year or two ago had Marc Guggenheim on, and he talked a little bit about kind of the background to that story. So, but again, from the artistic perspective, I mean, this is a Spider-Man comic, but you're doing a war story. I'm just curious, like, what from your end, what kind of research did you put into that? Do you had other experience working on those kind of books before? Or?
I didn't have any experience working on those kind of books before. If you look at my career, I tend to try to veer more towards sci-fi and fantasy stuff, so I don't have to do reference. But for that one, I did do a lot of reference. And I was very concerned with making sure I got all the military things right. One of the biggest compliments I've got is from servicemen have come up to me and said how much they enjoyed that issue and how I managed to get things mostly right. I think one of the most kind of memorable things I've ever had at a convention anywhere was a guy came up to me with that issue, and it was kind of a bit battered, and I said, "Oh, it's nice to see a well-read comic." And it's like that because I kept it under my flak jacket for 6 months tour of Iran or Afghanistan. I can't remember where he was, but I mean, you can't get a much better kind of compliment than that.
Well, the book concludes with this kind of stunning, at the time reveal of Flash Thompson had lost his parts of his legs in combat. And, the book goes out of its way to avoid showing that until the end. I guess, as an artist, what were the challenges and some of the, things that you did to kind of maintain that surprise? How was that to work on maintaining a visually limited book?
It's a very good question that I'd probably have to look through the comic to actually give you the answers now. I can't remember specifically now. I just... I do remember sort of thinking, I've got to make sure that we don't give anything away. But I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what techniques I used to do it. I think I've drawn about another 600 or 700 pages since then. So
I guess it's not super typical to see the lower part of people's legs in comics anyway.
Certainly not with some artists. That's a Deadpool joke.
Yes, we got it. So another one of the stories from that era that was fairly popular and talked about was the Red-Headed Stranger story, where it was like the return of Mary Jane to the comics full time, that you worked a couple of issues on, and again, given kind of the third rail qualities of Peter and Mary Jane at that point in Marvel editorial, I'm curious, was there any kind of pressure on you artistically to deliver MJ in her full glory in those stories, or I mean, was it just another book for you, so to speak?
Well, there wasn't any pressure from editorial, in particularly in that way. But I mean, I always feel the pressure as a comic fan myself to do justice to the characters and the past, and the heritage that I'm given the honor to play with. So yeah, I felt that pressure. You don't want the one to let down the fans. You don't want somebody open it and you rip that up and go, well, that's not as good as she used to be. It's so yeah. I mean, I feel a lot of pressure that way, but.
It's very infrequent that we get a chameleon story in the pages of Spider-Man, and you got to do that amazing design of the chameleon's lair with all those...
That was one of my favorite pages I did for the Spider-Man run.
I'll never forget it with all the faces hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Could you talk about designing that? And was that on the page for you when you received it, or is that like something that sprung forth from your mind?
That was me, I think. I just wanted to make him scary, and because just a guy who puts on different faces can be like not a very serious villain. If he could just be pretty like he's just a guy who puts a mask on. So I wanted to make him creepy and somebody that you could see could be a serious threat to Spider-Man. And it was a fun page to do.
Well, hats off. It's my favorite chameleon story, I think, and because it's so scary. Like that image tells you so much about that character that was like maybe always under the surface, but like we'd never seen anything quite like that.
Oh, thank you. That's a big compliment.
Barry, before we let you go, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to plug where maybe we can find more of your stuff. Is there a website, social media, anything like that where people can find your work and buy commissions, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. There's a Facebook group, art group, which is called, I have to get this right because I often get it wrong. Yeah, just Barry Kitson Art on Facebook. There's also an Instagram place you can find me, and Comic Art Fans. There's a gallery of my artwork you can find there. I'm happy to respond to anybody and everybody who contacts me.
Great. Any future for you for Spider-Man that you've got coming down the road?
Nothing Spider-Man related at the moment. I'm working on Doctor Strange at the moment.
Very cool.
Ooh,
we're excited about that.
I will, in case you did not know this, Spider-Man was actually my very first professional work. Back in October '83.
I didn't know that.
No.
What issue was that?
It was for Marvel UK. They did a series of issues of him of Peter Parker visiting England, and they had a story in England, and that was written by Mike Collins, and it was my first professional work, and I was inked by Mark Farmer, and we never worked together again until we did Spider-Man together.
How funny!
In the US. So
well, now we're going to try to go hunt that down here at the convention.
Yeah, I've got a few people have brought issues up for me to sign. It was fun. I mean, Marc made me look great. I mean, it was obviously my first ever work, and he inked it and made me look.
It's always good to have an inker that's got your, talent as part of his focus.
Oh yeah, Marc's great. Absolutely great.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
It's been my pleasure.
Yes, thanks, Barry.
So next up, we've got another voice actor of Spider-Man, our second in the show's history. We also had Christopher Daniel Barnes on, I don't even know how many episodes ago, but definitely within the past 100 episodes. But this one was a special treat for me because, I did that interview with Ralph Bakshi early on in the season, which I couldn't believe that fate worked to kind of have that happen. But now I got to talk to Paul Soles from that series, who did the voice of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And if you haven't listened to our interview with Ralph Bakshi, the kind of showrunner of seasons 2 and 3 of that show, go back to season 2, episode 5 of our show. But Paul is another one of these guys, like all the kind of old creators on Spider-Man. Not old, but like the classic creators of the character, who seem to just kind of like operate out of this Stan Lee playbook where they just know how to talk about this character in really eloquent ways. So Paul Soles is just another one of these wonderful guys to talk to. So let's get right to that interview. Everyone, it's Dan here again at Terrificon, and I'm sitting down with Marc and our special guest here, Paul Soles, the voice of Spider-Man from the Spider-Man 67 cartoon. If anybody knows anything about spider talking, it's him. So thanks for coming on our show.
You're very welcome. Wallop and web snappers, everybody. Just a reminder that phrase only appeared in the cartoons, never in the comic books.
Well, there you go.
It's unique to the series.
All right. So we recently had Ralph Bakshi on our show, who famously was like the showrunner, I guess, for seasons 2 and 3 of the show.
Right.
I guess before we even get to those seasons, I wanted to talk to you about how you found yourself in this role of Spider-Man. What kind of an audition process you went through?
I'm embarrassed, in a way, like to say, that there was a lovely pool of very accomplished radio actors in the city of Toronto, largely developed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they did plays from Shakespeare to modern. It was essentially the foundation of Canadian theater. There wasn't much theater. The radio, because of the size of the country, 6 time zones, 6,000 miles, you know. So that's where we learned to do the job. And a lot of good people were developed through the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's sponsorship of these programs. And I had a cousin who was a very prominent announcer, which was an honorable profession in those days, on the CBC. And thanks to his introduction, he got me involved with some of these projects. And as I say to most people, more good luck than good management is what's given me my career.
So how were you able to develop a character of Spider-Man that you were able to put your voice to? I mean, when we've been talking to people throughout this season about, and the animated series has been brought up, and, you know, at the time, you know, Spider-Man wasn't obviously what he is now in terms of his recognizability. The cartoon was really one of the things that brought him to a larger audience. So, I mean, did you read the comics and come up with something, or did you just do what you did and it came out the way it did?
I'm going to refer you back to a modern icon named Clint Eastwood and a number of other people, but certainly in today's terms, Clint represents the axiom that it's all in the casting. If the director can see the character or hear the character in the person he's casting, he or she can get out of the way and just let the actor go. So in order to do that, I'm going to flatter myself a little bit by saying the directors sort of could say, okay, Souls can do that. So they were able to think I understood what it might be to be a teenager, wasn't very old, who can't get along with girls, kind of a nerd, has this bite by the radioactive spider. He's kind of innocent. He's in the sense, the kind of character he is because he's the loss of his uncle, the circumstances that made him able to overcome difficulties ordinary teenagers wouldn't. And he took it seriously. He had some conscience, a social conscience. He had a bad break, and he wanted to make it right. And he had the powers by this accidental bite to get it done. Well, what could be better? And I, always thought of myself a bit. I was never the big ladies' man during my adolescent years, so you had to work at it a little bit. And so that was essentially what I was bringing to the character. And if that's what the producers thought I was able to do, I was the beneficiary of their kind judgment.
So famously, the show under Grant Ray Lawrence had a bit of a more robust budget to produce its episodes, the first season of the show. With a variety of talents and characters pulled straight out of the comics. I guess I'm curious for you, during that kind of first season, what was it like working with those groups of actors? Was it like a radio drama? Did you guys all get along and put on these shows?
We all did get along, and we almost all of us had day jobs in a way. So this was kind of our playtime, our fun. And most actors are children, so the opportunity to kind of just blow off steam by playing, we had good enough scripts. They kind of directed themselves in the way of your reaction one to the other. And if a child psychiatrist had come into the studio and seen us as adults writhing on the floor, climbing the wall, waving, banging, screaming, yelling, just like children, that it would have put us all in white jackets and sent us away to the funny farm. But it was just, that's what actors are essentially. When they say you're playing a role or whatever, you really are playing. And that's what we were doing.
Ralph Bakshi took over the show for seasons 2 and 3, and he's a very famous animator for doing kind of edgier material. Did you feel a shift in how you were directed and how you were kind of performing in those second and third seasons?
I have to confess to you, I don't think we were. I don't think there was anything different or unusual in that as actors we would respond to the script. I think any decent actor, I'll tell you one that comes to mind immediately is Jeff Daniels, who was in The Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin's wonderful scripts. He has always championed and said, as an actor really is only as good as good writing. And any good actor worth his salt would know the quality of Sorkin's writing. And you just rise to that. It makes everything so much easier, more enjoyable, more profoundly worth it. So you get a good script, everything from Shakespeare down, and you sail with it. You don't have to really work if you got the words in the first place well written.
Did you have any sense of the popularity of this character at the time?
Nobody had at the time the idea this was going to endure so long. I may be a bit presumptuous, but with all of his abilities and ego, I think even Stan Lee would have admitted he wasn't so sure this was a lifetime project. People were kind of deriding him. Yeah, here's your superhero. He's a nerd. He can't get along with girls. This and that. And yet Stan had confidence in the circumstances that would resonate with people. Yeah, a guy who had a couple of strikes against him, but he tries harder. And he's doing it for good, noble, social reasons. To right a wrong, to make a wrong corrected, influenced by his elders. What's wrong with that?
And here we are 50 plus years later, still talking about it. We had Ralph Bakshi on the show. He admitted that he's never seen it since it went to air.
Yes.
And that the show meant something to so many people. What has that journey been like for you to kind of realize that, I know you have Hermie, and that's probably a much more broadly beloved character, nostalgia, but what has it been like for you to kind of discover the place of these guys in people's hearts and the place that you have in people's consciousness as the voice of Spider-Man?
We were kids. We were in our early 30s when we did this. At least I was. All I can say is that over the years, with some maturity and living, you suddenly realize what the appeal, let's say at least for Rudolph and Spider-Man to a degree, for the reasons I've mentioned.
Sure.
You start to realize that there's something universal in the idea that to have been marginalized, set aside, said you're not part of the real whole group, is something almost everybody goes through at one time or another. Whether it's never being put on the first baseball team at school or whatever. Everybody's been put in that position where you're kind of different or not quite accepted. And that's a common denominator. And in Rudolph, for example, the circumstances are that the poor guy who wanted to be a dentist was different, suddenly was the savior of the whole community, was justification. In terms of Spider-Man, again, marginalized, kind of a nerdy teenager, but who can and did save the day for good reasons. I think these are worthwhile lessons. I don't think you have to be a street bully, knock somebody around, insult somebody to make yourself feel important. I think doing a good deed is still a worthwhile thing.
I'm so interested in that because Hermie's voice and Spider-Man's voice done by you couldn't be more different. One is really nasal and one is very deep and kind of has a bit of a...
Well, I'm a schizo, that's all.
It's hard to believe it's the same person. What do you think it is about the bass quality of your voice that lent you well to these roles or these kind of heroes?
As I said earlier, I'm grateful to the directors who gave me the opportunity and just let me go. And I think, as I said earlier about Mr. Eastwood, it's that quality. I met a very famous director at one point, John Huston, did some magnificent work internationally in the 60s, 70s, and so forth. And he was one of those who literally gave no direction. And some people, Michael Caine, I interviewed once, and he was directed by Huston in The Man Who Would Be King. He and Sean Connery, a wonderful film. And apparently, Caine had hoped for direction from this world-class director. And all Huston ever said was, Michael, perhaps just a little faster. That's it. Now, that's a vote of confidence for an actor.
Right.
And it's pretty nice when you meet a director who's so confident that he has you there and expects that you are responding to the script the way he does as an adult with a certain vision. So he doesn't need to do anything to help you or direct you. Let you go. Jeff Daniels, I believe, has said the same thing in interviews after his time on the Newsroom.
And what's it like acting against something that's not there? You have to imagine these characters that,
That's hard for me to imagine. Give me an example.
You've got Spider-Man fighting some tentacle monster. How are you reacting to
How
that?
do you respond to danger, threats, wrong? That's universal. Everybody does that.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of good scripts. They're universal. They touch something in everybody at some time.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Pleasure.
And thank you for being such a big part of so many of our lives.
More good luck than good management.
Thank you so much.
So next up, we've got Marc Guggenheim. He's a friend of the show. We did an awesome interview with him about the Brand New Day era, and kind of someone that I've run into all over LA and become familiar with. And really, he's just a great person. So we didn't really have a ton to talk to him about regarding new Spider-Man stuff from him because our interview is so thorough. But I think he's always a great guy to check in with about comics, modern comics. He's writing X-Men Gold right now and dealing with the kind of reveal of the wedding in that story. And so we wanted to ask him a little bit about, how the industry works in regards to spoilers and editorial, because he's quite open about the kind of behind the scenes process. So let's take it away, Marc Guggenheim. Hi, everybody. This is Dan here on the floor of Terrificon. I'm here with Mark Giannacchio and another Marc Guggenheim.
Hey.
Welcome back to the show, Mark.
It's nice to be back.
It's been a little while.
It has been a while. It's been a long while, actually.
2 years, I believe.
Yeah. Time flies.
Time does fly, and we're all just getting a little bit balder.
Yes, we are. Well, some of us.
Yes.
Some of us.
It's still happening.
Well, you're getting balder. We have actually maintained our
equally bald.
Equally bald. In fact, if I don't shave my head for a couple of days, I become less bald. I can do that. You can't.
Before we get to the heart of the topic, I don't know if you've been reading modern Spider-Man comics.
Yes, of course. Well, I'm I'll be honest. I'm in the tank slot. I'm a big Dan Slott fan, so I've been reading Dan's run.
What about Nick Spencer's run?
I'm behind. I'm only 2 issues behind, but I have to get to it.
But you've read issue 1.
Yes.
So we need to talk about this because you worked during the Brand New Day era with a team that had explicitly had to deal with the fact that Mary Jane and Peter were not to be together.
Yes.
At least married.
Yes.
This is the new understanding we've come to understand. And so what I'm curious about from you is that has clearly been undone. To some regard, they are back together again.
Yes, they're certainly romantically entangled again.
At least it seems.
I don't want to presume anything, but let's say for the sake of argument, they are fully on back together.
They are I wouldn't say holy matrimony because that implies something incorrect.
Yes.
But they are.
Well, let's just take it at face value. They are attached to some degree again.
Yes.
Yes,
We
indeed.
are really beating around this bush.
Yes, we are.
So is Marvel.
Yes.
Thoughts, feelings that, and I will say that I think it was yesterday, Quesada made some kind of statement or suggested, or maybe it was in one of our interviews, suggested that he never said they couldn't be together. He just said that they couldn't be married. Your thoughts?
Well, by the way, on its face, that is absolutely true. Because if you think about it, all One More Day did was it never said they were never together.
Right.
It just said they were never married. So
Right.
I think Joe is being very consistent with everything he's said for now a great number of years. Look, that being said, it's comic books, and comic books are nothing if not cyclical. And, different eras cycle back around over the years. If they were to get married tomorrow, I'd be completely comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think I've been a Spider-Man reader, since I was a very young kid. And I've was a Spider-Man reader when he was married. I was a Spider-Man reader when he wasn't married. I was a Spider-Man reader when they were married and estranged. And I'll be honest, I've always been very agnostic on the whole marriage front.
We feel the same way.
It's never been a make or break thing for me. So I look at it as, it's a cyclical thing. If they were to, get back together, then they get back together. Because I do think for some fans, the married years are their years. As fans, they're those are the years that they remember. Totally respect that. And also, after how many years has it been since Brand New Day and One More Day?
10.
Oh, yeah,
10. After 10 years, after 10 years, you're welcome to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I was talking about Spider-Man, of course, oh my God, I'm blanking on the number, the Flash Thompson issue that I wrote with Barry Kitson.
You should know this of
I know, I
anyone.
usually know it right off the top of my head, but also it's the second day of a convention and my brain is mush.
I don't blame you for a second.
But I was saying, of all the things I've done in comics, having Flash lose his legs is really almost the only thing that has stuck. And, of course, Flash was killed, spoiler alert, in Dan's second to last issue. And it's comic books. I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say that at some point Flash is going to come back to life, and something tells me that when Flash comes back to life, he will have all of his limbs.
The one scar you inflicted, undone.
I have no insight, but my point is that nothing ever lasts forever in comics. And I mean, truth be told, it's like the only thing I can really think of that has happened in recent memory and has stuck is the death of Marvel. The death of Captain Marvel. That's the only one. Everything else I feel like gets undone eventually.
I think, CB is down at the end of this aisle. I feel like you could pitch a story right now, the return of Marvel.
I'll be honest, I absolutely would if I thought I had a great story to tell. I'll give you a good example. I thought, Ed Brubaker's bringing back Bucky was, to me, the best example of, if you have a great story, bring the character back. That's a great story, and that's a great way of doing it. Don't do it just to do it. Just as I think you shouldn't kill a character off just to kill a character off. Do it if you have a great story to tell.
Now, just to follow up on what you just mentioned a few minutes ago regarding your flashback issue, you obviously referred to, again, spoiler alert, Flash Thompson's death in ASM 800. But, I mean, I think a lot of people kind of consider the emotional journey that Flash went on that culminated in that issue began with your flashback issue. So, considering you kind of shepherd the character forward into a new status quo to kind of see it culminate the way it did that resonate with you in any kind of way?
It really did. I mean, it resonated with me in a huge way because, first of all, I thought it was just a really effective story, and it was really great storytelling on Dan's part. And the great thing about Dan and his run on Spider-Man is he always had a great sense of history, not just of Spider-Man in general, but also his own run and his time on the book. And I thought what was awesome about his ending was everything felt like it was driving towards 800 and 801. Like, you really did feel as if this was the completion of a multi-year-long story. And I love that. That's, to me, one of the great things about comic books, particularly in a time when the long runs of, years and years and years, almost like a decade, are a thing of the past.
I wanted to follow up with something that you and I talked about outside of the podcast when I saw you at Collector's Paradise, a comic shop, a little while ago, which was your issue of X-Men Gold, where, surprise, the wedding didn't actually take place. And earlier in the day, Marvel released a press statement where it revealed the twist of your story. But getting back to the Mary Jane thing, there was no inkling that was going to happen. There was no press. There was no. It surprised us out of nowhere, and there was a real push with Marvel in regards to saying, keep this quiet. We're really going to. We're really trying to keep this a secret. And I guess, how do you feel like there's the press that brings more people reading it, and the versus keeping it a secret and maintaining the surprise? And how do you think, as a writer, maybe not an editor, but how would you balance revealing those kind of things or keeping them secret?
Well, there's sort of I have a micro reaction, sort of a macro reaction. Micro in terms of X-Men 30. First of all, it wasn't like Marvel did this without consulting with me first.
No, of course not.
CB actually called me up and said, hey, listen, here's the situation. And I don't really feel like it's my place to sort of comment on the specifics of Marvel's decision-making process, but I will tell you, they did want to keep it a secret, and that was very much in the forefront of their minds, but it was becoming increasingly clear that they wouldn't be able to keep it a secret. And if if something's going to be spoiled, and this is where I start to transition to macro, for my money, as someone who I feel like on Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow and the CW shows, half my job was keeping secrets. My philosophy is that if you can't keep the secret, if it looks like the secret's going to come out, explode the grenade on your own terms. And I don't want to speculate, but I feel like that was very much sort of what Marvel was doing with X-Men 30, and I don't blame them. It's funny, everyone sort of is focusing these days on DC and Marvel and the decisions that they make of when to spoil and when not to spoil. And for my money, people are missing the point. What they really, if they're going to be angry, they shouldn't be angry at Marvel and DC. Believe me, Marvel and DC want to keep stuff secret. Right. They should be angry at all the people on the internet and some of the, quite frankly, smaller sites who live to spoil things. That's the problem. And don't be angry at Marvel and DC. They're just doing their best in a world where it is increasingly hard to keep any kind of plot twist a secret.
It's so much better to be Marvel PR releasing it than Bleeding Cool taking pictures and releasing it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, and we would always take the same philosophy in the Arrowverse shows where we're trying to keep a secret, but if we shoot on location, there's paparazzi there. We do our best to stop the paparazzi, but they've got long telephoto lenses, and they can get it's either shoot only on sound stages, which is going to really sort of ruin the scope and production value of the shows, or it's roll the dice and have to deal with the paparazzi.
I hope I didn't give you any hot topic questions. I know
No, look, actually I like talking about it because, I mean, truth be told, by the end of my 6-year run as showrunner of Arrow, I got tired of trying to keep all the secrets. I felt like I was in the CIA, and it just is exhausting. I actually give Beth Schwartz a lot of credit. She's working really hard to keep the secrets of Arrow Season 7 under wraps, but it takes a lot of energy. It's not easy to do. So I've got nothing but, empathy and sympathy for Marvel and DC trying to keep their storyline secret. It's frustrating, but we live in this incredibly interconnected time with the internet where everyone is walking around with cameras and, microphones in their pockets. It's hard. It gets harder and harder to keep a secret.
And are rewarded for releasing secrets.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Again, I feel like they're the problem. It's not Marvel and DC. Marvel and DC are just, believe me, if they're spoiling something, it's because they're exploding a grenade that was going to go off anyway.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you so much for talking to us,
No, it's
Marc.
always fun, guys. I appreciate it. Congrats on the end of season 2.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So that was it. That's the last of our creator interviews on the show. And as always, I wanted to say thanks again to all of these wonderful guests who helped make this 200th episode so special for us, and our time at Mohegan Sun for Terrificon so special. But now, like we've been teasing, for the best part, we turn to you, our listeners at home, to call into our number, 9 Red Goblin, a character we definitely created, Marc, and leave us a voicemail with your thoughts on our past 100 episodes and your own particular journeys. And I gotta say, I was really happy with all the messages we got, so let's just roll them all.
Hey guys, this is Rylan Bojack from Orlando, Florida. I'm the guy who came up with the theme song for your show. So I was just calling in. Just wanted to say thank you for all you guys do. I think I've been listening to you guys since, I believe, like your second or third episodes, like right there at the beginning. And I don't know, I was just looking for a Spider-Man podcast, and it just worked out perfectly that you guys just were starting at that time too. So I've really enjoyed watching your show grow and kind of see how you guys have adapted and changed things and changed formats and doing all that. So I've also really loved being a part of the show and having that song be at the beginning. It's made me really happy consistently for a long time for that to be something that I could contribute to, so I can do my music and I can do my Spider-Man thing with you guys. So it's just been really cool. I've just been really pleased that you guys have used the song, and just also wanted to say I appreciate your conversation. You guys are always highly intellectual. Even when you guys don't, like something, you always have clear justifications, and you articulate yourselves well, and you guys are hilarious too. So that's, that always makes a huge difference. So can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys. I've spent a lot of time driving around listening. So here's to another 100 episode, guys. I hope that there's many, many more, and congratulations on the milestone. It's super awesome. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Marc and Dan, this is Jonathan Osborne. Yes, that is my real last name. I'm from Port Richey, Florida. I've really only been listening to the podcast for a few months, but I really, really enjoy it. Listening to you guys, it feels like I'm talking Spider-Man with a couple of my buddies. So you guys really do a great job. I just wanted to say congrats on 200 episodes, and here's to 200 more. Thanks, guys.
Well, hello, Dr. Dan, Mischievous Marc. This is just Jason Carrier from Montreal, giving you guys a call. I am currently in Europe, and I got to say, I binge listened to a bunch of episodes on the plane over here. And I wanted to send a message to you guys and say that's probably my favorite memory or favorite activity with your amazing Spider Talk podcast. It's being able to listen to your voices for 7 hours on a flight across the world. So keep it up. You guys are the best, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Hi, Marc and Dan. My name is Kevin Dorsey. I live in Moyock, North Carolina. I would like to congratulate you both on your 200th episode. I've been listening probably since about episode 50, and I have not missed an episode since. I usually listen to the podcast when I'm on my way to the comic store. So the closest one is in Virginia Beach, which is about 45 minutes away. So it's the perfect time to listen to your podcast, and it makes the trip a little bit more enjoyable because it's mostly farmland and there's nothing to see. So once again, congratulations, guys, and here's to another 200. Thanks a lot.
This is John Nieves from Orlando. I just wanted to call in and congratulate Amazing Spider Talk on 200 episodes. I started listening to you guys in summer of 2017 last year. I had torn my ACL at work and I was recovering at home. And I was stuck inside the house for probably like a good month before I could start my recovery. So I started reading Amazing Spider-Man again. I had taken a break for maybe a year or so, probably at the start of the Parker Industries stuff. I came across you guys' podcast, and I just really enjoyed Dan and Mark's insight and their opinions on Spider-Man. I always had like a reverence for the character that I felt was maybe kind of silly for having, considering it was a fictional character, but it was nice to see that I wasn't the only one out there that had the same kind of reverence, or like had that the character meant so much to them. But more important than any of that, though, I always appreciated that they don't resort to disrespecting the creators because they don't agree with every story decision they make. So now I don't really consider I don't just consider Amazing Spider Talk a part of my reading experience. More than anything, really, I kind of consider them a part of my Spider-Man experience. So congratulations on 200 episodes. Here's hoping for 200 more, guys.
Hey guys, this is Kane from the Untold Talks of Spider-Man. I got 2 questions for you guys. First, I'm in my backyard and I've got something of a bee problem. What did Marc do to get rid of Swarm? Because I think I've got my own little swarm problem here, and I'm looking for advice. Second, it's been like 100 episodes and you guys still haven't covered the Golden Oldie. So I think I'm just gonna have to do that myself. I think you've pushed me into that corner. So just calling you out, and also want to congratulate you guys on 200 episodes. It's been a blast listening to you guys. I'm ready for 200 more. So thanks. And Dan, I still need to get you on the show. Talk to you later, guys.
Hi, Dan and Mark. This is Chris Long from Columbus, Ohio. Congratulations on your 200th episode. Really love your podcast. I've been collecting Spider-Man since I was 11 years old. I'll never forget the first issue that I picked off the spinner rack was ASM 229, which is, of course, the first of a 2-part, now classic storyline, Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut by Stern and Romita. And what a jumping on point it was for me. And it was a life-changing event to, experience Spider-Man in the midst of one of the best comic runs of all time in Stern and Romita. And, I've always considered myself a pretty knowledgeable Spider-Man fan until I started listening to your podcast, and I've learned so much. You guys are knowledgeable, informative, and entertaining, and, do a great job of, providing knowledge and entertainment about the Spider-Man universe. And I just wanted to say good luck, wishing you the best for another 200 episodes, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mark and Dan. Dennis Mercier calling in to congratulate you guys on your 200th episode. Been listening to the show since the early single digits and all the way through. Thanks to you guys, I have started my own chase, going back, trying to collect back issues of Amazing Spider-Man from 100 to today. So just wanted to say thanks a lot for setting me on my own way. Enjoy the show and keep up the great work. Thanks.
Hi, this is Kevin Ewing calling from Western New York. Congratulations, Mark and Dan, on another 100 episodes. You two are the best darn banter buddies us Spidey podcast listening folks could hope for. I shared my story of listening to the podcast on the 100th episode, so instead for the 200th, I'll share my hopes for the next 100. Hopefully, Mark learns what the word essential means. I'm looking at you, Marvel 2-in-1 Annual. Hopefully, Dan acquires the fine art of putting packaging tape on the end of shipping tubes. Hopefully, we don't get any more weird Ditko conspiracies from TV personalities. These last two are a cheap plug for becoming a Patreon member. Hopefully, Mark and Dan's significant others can join in on another February episode. They always brought a touch of class to the show. Hopefully, you guys continue to get great interviews from our favorite Spidey creators. Hopefully, you continue the insightful analysis of the Spider-Man mythos that you've always provided. And finally, hopefully this 200th episode is a little more in quality like Spectacular Spider-Man 200 than Amazing Spider-Man 200. Thanks to you both for providing many hours of listening pleasure on such a beloved character, and I look forward to the next 100 episodes.
Hi guys, my name's Daniel, just calling from England.
First discovered your show early on in season 1, and really loved the synergy that the two of you built when discussing Spider-Man. Tend to listen to you when I've had a stressful day at work, or if I'm out walking the dog, and the moment that those little sound bites come on and the songs, all the stress melts away. Loving the Slack app, keep up the good work there, and being a Patreon member, the commissioned artwork is absolutely fantastic. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Hi, this is Greg Burt calling, and I listen to the show most mornings, or whenever a new episode comes out, between Untold Tales and Amazing Spider Talk, and then the Patreon page. Every time I go into work, I work in youth corrections, and I actually even started up a comic book club, an anime club for my kids. So I work with corrections, 20-year-old gentlemen that are either at risk or literally at risk themselves. So to try and reach.
Hey, Dan and Mark, congratulations. This is Alan Scherstl calling from New York to say I'm glad you made it to another milestone. I never doubted for a second. And I look forward to many more years of trying to remember whether this podcast is called Superior Talk or Amazing Talk. Anyway, the thing I really wanted to talk to you guys today about, though, was the great failure of your podcast so far. And that, of course, is the failure of the Papa Jonah character, that beloved pizza icon, to catch on, to appear in the Marvel books, to appear in Amazing, to maybe save the sorry state of American delivery pizza. And then I realized, but wait, you guys actually have great outsized influence upon the books. I mean, you guys killed your Flash Thompson, and then Dan Slott killed his Flash Thompson. You guys invented the Red Goblin, and then, hey, Dan Slott invented a Red Goblin. And then I realized that maybe the magic is in the phone number. The Red Goblin phone number that you invented is clearly what gave Dan Slott the idea to pair up these two beloved, longtime ASM characters into this new version. And so I thought, maybe what you guys need for this milestone episode is a new phone number. A new phone number that could give us a new character that will show the power of this podcast and affect the Spider-Man mythos for a long time. So the first phone number, I went to see what phone numbers were available, and you guys are in luck. You can get 727-2555, which if you take those numbers and look at your what do you call that? Your keypad, you will see that translates to Papa JJJ. Just do that. Switch Red Goblin to Papa JJJ, and bam, maybe Jonah will forget Spider-Man is Peter Parker and start delivering pizzas. And then I started looking to see what other numbers were available, and you could get 286-8622, which is a great number because it would allow you to combine two other beloved characters into a new surprise. 286-8622, of course, is AUNTMAN, Ant-Man, combining the powers of Aunt May and Ant-Man. And then, inspired by the Red Goblin, you could do 227-6265, which would be Carna MJ, Carna MJ, Carnamage, I believe was how we would say it. Red hair, red symbiote, probably if drawn by 90s dudes, nearly nude all the time. But one of the hallmarks of the Dan Slott run is taking past obscure characters and bringing them back. So that could work with the phone number 787-9273. That, of course, is SUPWARD. Not just Senator Ward from the Byrne Mackey run. No, we're talking the Superior Ward. Like maybe this guy, he runs a committee or something. And then, we're honoring the end of the Dan Slott run lately, that epic decade-long run of Spider-Man comics. And in his honor, I present to you the phone number 566-4263 for a great, entirely new villain. 566-4263, of course, is LONGAME, Lon Game. Short for Lonington Gameworth IV. This would be a shadowy character who could appear in an issue or two now, drop a few lines that don't really make any sense, and then maybe in ASM 1000 turns out to be the villain who's been behind it all the whole time. I give you the long game, and I congratulate you guys on your long game. Long may you game this out. Congratulations, gentlemen. You're doing great. Bye.
Hi, Dan and Mark. This is Adam Chapman from the Comic Shenanigans podcast. Congratulations on reaching episode 200. It's a great achievement as you both have built the podcast into an example of what a comic book podcast should try to be. The underlying philosophy of your show, to be positive instead of negative like seemingly most of the internet, is just part of the secret sauce that makes your show so enjoyable to listen to and to support on Patreon. Over 200 episodes, listeners have listened to your bonds of friendship grow and deepen, and we get to come along for the ride. In the past 100 episodes, I've really enjoyed the format change as it has allowed you both to flex your muscles and talk about different aspects that really dig into the legacy of Spider-Man, both as a character and as a comic book. I'm glad that you have managed to still fit in episodes focusing on new issues, but the deep dive into Spider-Man lore is fun and engaging. Although Dan and I have corresponded throughout the years through Facebook, and he's been on my podcast in the past, usually for anniversary episodes, there's one story I don't think I've ever actually told him, which I actually wanted to share for this episode. Although my podcast started before yours back in August 2012, I can honestly say that it wouldn't be the show it is today if not for your show. When you had your first Spider Talk and Their Amazing Friends episodes, it is what first made me think that maybe I could reach out to comic book creators as well. Hearing you guys talk with such amazing people like Ron Friends, Marc Bagley, it really inspired me. It made me think that, even though we're both relatively young podcasts, there are you guys talking to all these amazing people. Maybe I could do that. It helped inspire me to take that leap myself and start actually reaching out to creators, reaching out to some of the same creators, and to talk with creators who had both written and illustrated comics of my youth and comics I was enjoying right then. It transformed my show completely, as now it's predominantly a show where I interview comic creators, and I don't think I ever would have taken that leap without Amazing Spider Talk kind of inspiring me to do that first. So thanks for inspiring a naive podcaster to take that chance, put himself out there, and as a result, I've had amazing conversations with so many different comic creators, both involved with Spider-Man, involved with many different facets of Marvel, DC, and independent comics. So thank you so much, because without your guys' kind of model and seeing that it can be done, it's a young podcast who's actually being able to talk with these people. I may never have done that myself, and maybe my show would have ended a long time ago. Once my show went through a format change as well, as my original co-host kind of moved away, and it wasn't really possible with our schedules to make it work. I'm always so amazed by the fact that you guys are bi-coastal and you still find a way to make it work. And again, it's a testament to the friendship you guys have developed, and it's hard to make it work when you're in different cities, let alone different time zones, different states, on different ends of the states, United States, I should say. So it's just really interesting to see that, and so I don't know if my show would even still be around now if it wasn't for the interviews. And again, that's all thanks to Amazing Spider Talk. So thanks for laying the groundwork and showing me that it can be done, and really forcing me to make that step myself. I really appreciate it, because again, I've had such amazing conversations, and it was all thanks to Amazing Spider Talk. I hope to have more episodes show up in my queue to listen to for as long as Amazing Spider-Man continues to be published. Make mine Amazing Spider Talk.
Hi, Dan and Mark. My name is Jarrett from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Congrats on 200 episodes of the Amazing Spider Talk. I've been collecting Spider-Man comics for, at least 25 years. As I kind of became an adult, most of my friends who also collected comics kind of stopped, and my little community of people who I could talk to about comics kind of dwindled, and I eventually stopped reading as well for a few years. I got back into comics again around Marvel Legacy, and ended up binging about 5 years worth of Spider-Man comics, from Superior Spider-Man all the way up to Marvel Legacy. At that time, I was kind of looking for some kind of community or something to basically read a comic and then, break it down and see what we liked and what we didn't like. First started Googling some random review sites, didn't really like what I found, and eventually I decided let's find a podcast. And the first one I tried was the Amazing Spider Talk, and I loved it right off the bat. I've been going back through all the old episodes and listening to them, and the intelligent conversations between Dan and Mark are fantastic. And I plan on listening for a long time to come. Also, the Slack community that I recently joined is great. It's kind of filled that void that I've had for a while when all my friends stopped reading comics. So it's nice to connect with people and just kind of nerd out about comics. Dan had wanted to hear stories about how we listen to the show. Well, I work in bylaw enforcement. So basically what that means is I go to properties and I enforce basically whatever property standards are out of code. So it involves giving people tickets and just having conversations with people about bringing their property up to code. Usually while I'm on the road, I'm listening to the Amazing Spider-Man podcast, or Amazing Spider-Talk podcast, sorry. I'll be basically pausing Dan and Marc mid-sentence, getting out of my car, sometimes giving people a ticket, sometimes getting into arguments, often getting yelled at. All part of the job. And once that's done, hop back in my car, let's play again. So it's a very nice reprieve after, what are the hard parts of my job, just to nerd back out, get into the zone, and, think about Spider-Man. So, again, congrats on 200 episodes, and I look forward to listening for the future. Thank you.
Hi, Dan and Marc. Greetings from Scotland. I discovered your podcast about 10 months ago and binged everything to date within about 2 weeks after getting the entire Superior run sale. I immediately signed up for your Patreon. I love your Slack group and it's helped me find fellow Spider fans to discuss the comics with. My girlfriend's getting sick of me discussing continuity and theorising at her. I look forward to your reviews just as much as I look forward to the next issue dropping. Congrats on 200 episodes, and here's to the next 200. Ewan.
Hi, Marc and Dan. Happy 200th anniversary episode. This is Joel Terrell out of Chaparral, New Mexico. And I just want to say congratulations and thank you guys for putting out so many great episodes over the years. I really started listening to you guys back whenever you guys were covering the clone conspiracy. I read you guys had some hot takes. I believe it was on CBR. And I started getting into you guys. I disagreed with 90% of what you said because I really love Ben Reilly. But I stuck around. I went back, listened to a lot of your essentials, ended up loving everything that you guys did. Like, seriously. Like, I may not always agree with you, but you guys are some of the most storied and best people I've ever listened to have a strong grasp on history and also the work that it takes to put out Spider-Man comics. And I just really want to thank you guys again for doing so much greatness for 200 episodes now. I actually, every time I go on a road trip, I will continually download and listen to the Amazing Friends Clone Saga episode with Howard Mackey. Like, I just loved that episode. My girlfriend is entirely too sick of listening to it. She probably heard it like 50 times now. But she put up with you guys. Also, she knows your theme song by heart now. It's perfect. Anyways, I want to thank you guys again. So episode, fantastic. Congratulations. Hope you guys go on to do a trillion more.
Hi, this is Steve Lambert calling in from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I go by the Slambert on the Amazing Spider Slack. I started listening to you guys right around when you went to your new format with seasons, and since that time I've stayed up to date on all your new episodes and have been catching up on your old episodes. I listen to you guys while I'm doing chores and while I'm walking to work, and if I ever have to drive anywhere by myself, I have you guys playing over the radio in my car as well. And I've got about 20 episodes left until I'm completely caught up. But I've really enjoyed listening to all of your episodes about old comics that I haven't read in a long time, and remembering what those stories were about. I'd forgotten about a lot of those stories, and it's been fun to hear about them again and hear your guys' take on them and stay up to date with this new stuff as well. I just wanted to say one thing, though. You guys haven't brought this up in a while, but you used to talk about Canadian bacon a lot on your older episodes. And I just want to say what Americans call Canadian bacon, Canadians call crappy American ham. We don't have that here. And what we do have is something called pea-meal bacon or back bacon. Pea-meal is like cornmeal. It's on the edge of the bacon. And it's different than strip bacon. We have that too, but it's actually delicious. And if you haven't had that, you should try it sometime because it's really good. And don't put your crappy breakfast food on us because it has nothing to do with us. All right? Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Okay to print, okay to publish. Congratulations, Marc and Dan, on 200 episodes. I've been a Spidey fan all my life. He's my favorite character. But hadn't bought any issue since Civil War. I've been listening to the podcast for almost a year now, and your passion is contagious. I bought every issue of the new book now, and I plan to stick around for a long time. Thanks for reminding me about power and responsibility. Here's to 200 more.
Hey guys, this is Chris Markle, also known as the Amazing Spider Dad on Twitter. I just want to thank both Dan and Marc for the labor of love that they have created in this podcast, and for inspiring me personally to finish my mission of reading all 800 plus issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Getting ready to start on the B-books now, but it was exciting to listen along, especially to the Essentials podcast, to go back and you know, kind of go back in time and think about all of what makes Spider-Man and Peter Parker so great in the entire Spider universe. It's also helped to reaffirm why I took to Spider-Man at such a young age, at 7, seeing the original animated series and why that connected with me, and to ultimately pass on that legacy to my son, who also is a huge webhead and has overcome so much in his life, even at 9 years old, with health conditions. He's an inspiration to me as well. So for me to pass that legacy on to him has meant so much, and you guys are a big part of that, as well as our community of Spider-Man fans around the globe. So thanks so much, and I wish you all the best in the future. Thanks so much, guys.
Hey everybody, it's Ethan Ainsworth here. I just wanted to tell you what a tremendous show The Amazing Spider Talk is. I host my own podcast called Nights, a Marvel podcast, but you shouldn't listen to it. You should listen to this because it's a much better show. I've been listening to this show for a very, very long time, back since it's been the Superior Spider Talk. And I gotta say, it's been there for me, you know, consistently. I've been able to go to it and listen to it whenever I was bored. You know, maybe I needed some Spider-Man in my life. It's always been there. Hopefully it always will be. Keep doing what you're doing, guys. Excelsior.
Hey, Mark and Dan. This is Marc Diefenderfer calling from Lafayette, Indiana. I was reading Mark's Chasing Amazing blog for about a year, maybe 2 years before you started the podcast, and I loved vicariously following along with Mark's chase. But when the first episode of the show came out, I thought, you know, I already read this blog pretty much every day. I'm not sure I really need to also listen to a podcast. Well, the fact that I'm calling in 199 episodes later, hopefully, should tell you that you were doing something right, even way back then, and that you still are. Anyway, I just wanted to congratulate you both for reaching this milestone. But even more importantly, I want to thank you, because what you two are doing by chronicling the history of Spider-Man and getting creators on the record who, if not for you, I don't think the world ever would have heard some of these people. And that's nothing short of a gift to people who love Spider-Man and to people who love popular culture. So thank you guys, and here's to another 200 episodes.
Whew, Dan, we're almost there. I don't even know exactly how many hours we're into the show right now, but thank you for joining us for this 200th episode anniversary spectacular of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. Dan, we're going to take some well-deserved time off. Any teases about upcoming content that people might want to know about?
Well, Mark, I can't say anything concrete, but I will say that you and I may be landing a few interviews directly from the heart of the Spider Office. So really, everybody, keep your fingers crossed and say your spider prayers to make this happen. Mark and I have been working pretty hard to kind of line up some really top-tier guests for the show. So I don't know what people can do. Can they cross all 8 of their limbs to make this happen?
Oh, boy. Come on, Dan.
But we've got some other surprises in store for you during the break as well, beyond those surprises. So truly the best way to keep the fun going is to become a part of our Patreon Members Club. And as always, we like to round up by saying what people can get as being a part of that club. So this week, our Patreon subscribers are going to get a special review episode of Amazing Spider-Man number 5, the end of that first story from the new creative team of Nick Spencer and Ryan Otley. And also, listeners should keep an eye on their mailboxes for the Daily Bugle and Alex Saviuk print that should be headed their way very soon. So if you're itching to get more amazing Spider Talk, even in our break, remember, there's no better place than that Patreon. And for just $3.99 a month, the price of a new comic, you'll get access to those new issue reviews, B-book reviews, extended interviews, mailbags, and more. And again, for $10 or more a month, you'll get that Alex Saviuk print or whatever artist we're doing at the time. And our just recently announced Steve Lieber print from Superior Foes of Spider-Man doing some D-list villain drawings for us.
Oh, man. Just to have Boomerang in an original piece of artwork, Dan. I mean, come on. What's better than that? This guy.
I
right?
can't think of much. Plus, we've also got the amazing Spider Slack community for you to join. Just check this episode's description for a link to join our Spider-Man Talkin' community. Mark, I can't believe it. We're ending episode 200 of the show. I think the best way to end this is really just to say thank you so much to everyone who's listened, not only through the several hours of this episode, but through all 200 episodes of our show, no matter the numbering be damned how we got to this number. Thank you so much for listening to us. We wouldn't be doing this if no one was listening. We'd just be talking to each other, and you guys make this possible.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, provided that Twitter it still exists after the end of this show, considering the number of hours we've been going for, where can we find you? And not just, I guess, on Twitter, but elsewhere on the internet.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SupSpiderTalk, and I'll also be hanging around my regular Twitter account at Dan Gavosden, where I do all my non-Spider-Man stuff. I'm going to be, working on my graphic novel a lot during the break and starting to kind of pitch it around to, comics companies. So if you want to follow my journey through that process, just follow me on Twitter at Dan Gavosden. Mark, what about yourself? What are you going to be doing during the break people should keep their eye out for?
You could, of course, find me on social media at Chasing ASM blog. You can still get my book, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. I don't have a graphic novel that I'm pitching, Dan, but I will be running the Chicago Marathon in early October. It's going to be marathon number 3 for me. So I'm sure in both the lead up and that weekend, it's Columbus Day weekend, I will be probably a bit of a wreck because that's just what happens to me when I'm running marathons. So, congratulations for all of you for seeing me be a wreck.
Well, we aren't taking this break lying down.
That's for certain.
You're going to be running a marathon, so that's incredible. What's been a marathon is this show, 200 episodes straight. That's at least 40 a year at the pace that we've been going. Mark, we've got a motto that's ended every single show of our podcast, and I'm sure the people at home don't need to hear it another time, but as we're always sure to remember, for another 100 episodes of this show, at least I hope so, Mark, what is our motto for the show?
Yes, Dan, that motto is, with great podcasts must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
Now let's go kill a burglar.
My heart!